Good afternoon, everybody. We'll get this meeting called to order. The very first thing before we get started on the work on our agenda, we have a very nice presentation to do today, and I'd like to invite the folks from Miracle Ear to come forward, and they are going to make a donation to the dog park.
All right.
We like donations.
We like being able to give you one.
They were supposed to put a microphone.
Here, how about this?
I don't know if that's on. Is it on? There we go. Thank you, Eric.
We're pleased to represent today, or have representing Miracle Ear today, Ken Maynard and Menard, who is our board-certified hearing ear aid dispenser for Miracle Ear, and then also Maya Haynes. And I have to tell you the story. Maya called me and said, we would like to do a benefit for the dog park, and would you be willing to accept some donations for the dog park? We'd like to help you out. We said yes, and she did an excellent job, and they're here to present a $1,000 donation to us for the dog park. So I'll let her tell you how they did it, and Rodney and Junior are here to help us out to have the donation, and this is going to go for promotions to the dog park, so we want to thank them and the community for always donating to our efforts.
I want to thank Ken Menard, the consultant for Miracle Ear, for doing this for us. He put a lot of effort into it himself. And I want to thank the people that were involved. We had an event on August 10th, and it ran through November 29th. Our owner of our company, An Aid to Life, Doug Shepard of Miracle Ear, offered $250 per set of aids that we sold through that time period. And we also had vendors that came. We had a small festival. And so we want to thank Canal View Candles and Soaps of Williamsport, Maryland, my husband and I's band Dogfoot, Things Remembered, Sears Optical, Sprint Kiosk, all in the Valley Mall, Meadows Original Frozen Custard, and Homemade Jewelry and Scarves by Judy and Rosie. All of them gave up something to be offered as a raffle. We chose the dog park because we had heard it was being built, and Ken and I are huge dog lovers, and being part of the community, not only the hard of hearing community, but the community at large, we wanted to do something that was really important. We also know that a lot of people have heard about seeing eye dogs. Not a lot of people have heard about hearing ear dogs and other kind of dogs. So we wanted to do something that had something to do with dogs, and we thought the dog park is the perfect thing. So we're here today after that event, and through November 29th, we were able to raise $1,000. So we're very, very happy to donate that today to the dog park. Ken, is there anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that you kind of said it, but our thrust is to the hearing impaired community, but we also, being members of the business community, wanted to be more involved with what's going on in our town. And so we felt that this was a good opportunity, and I was thinking about this, and your folks in the Parks Department reaffirmed it. It's nice when a project like the dog park brings people together, not just dogs running around, but people getting to meet their neighbors and hopefully having a better experience with their neighbors. So again, we want to thank you for allowing us to do it, and hopefully it'll go, and I'm sure it will, to improve your already great facility.
So thank you so much.
Sure. Should we come up to the, where do you want it, up here? Here, I'll take that from you, thanks. I think Aaron wants us, sure, if members of the council want to come up, that's fine. I'm sure my pretty face can represent all of them on the...
You're good, Mayor.
Oh, good. There we go. Junior, come on up here. Yeah. You're the guys that actually made this happen. Always do what Aaron says.
So.
three. Take another one for good measure. 1, 2, 3. And then 1 second. 3, 1, 2, 3.
Yeah, if you haven't liked the City of Hagerstown Municipal on Facebook, take this opportunity. I know all the folks at home are watching bundled up in their cozy in their homes. Thank you. Thank you very much. Appreciate your involvement.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bring your pets inside. Oh my. All right. Okay. It's a nice way to start the new year.
February 1st.
And that's right. So now let's get to the fun and talk about general obligation bond sales. Have our acting finance director and Lester Guthorn coming up to the table.
Good evening.
Greetings.
I actually think we'll get straight to the presentation. We originally had this scheduled back in December, and we had a little bit of snow.
Just a touch.
So we're
It's what I'm used to.
so we're here a couple weeks delayed. Without further ado, I think everybody had an opportunity to briefly meet Les Guthorn, our financial advisor. So I'll let him do a presentation. It should be in your packet as well to follow.
Good afternoon. Thank you for letting me stop by. I put together a presentation which I hope you all had a chance to take a look at. I'm going to go over it relatively quickly and try not to read every word. Please feel free to ask any questions go along, not that I would think you would not, but just in case there was some hesitation. By a manner of preface, the city has issued general obligation bonds for many, many years. They have done it two ways. One, through a public sale, where we put out a bid package. Various bidders come to bid on the package, not on the package, but publicly issued bonds. There is a formal bid system, which we actually do on computer now, over the internet. It is a very, relatively speaking, simple process. The work that's done before it is not as simple because there's a great deal that goes into it in developing documents and public offering statements. The other manner is essentially the other manner is a private placement. That's generally with a bank, who also goes through a bid process. But the bid process on the banks, there's only a few that end up bidding. The group of interested parties has reduced substantially over the years. Frankly, it wouldn't be surprising if you get 1 to 3 bidders. In the public sale, our experience with the City of Hagerstown in selling bonds has been you've had 5 to 9 bidders. More bidders, generally speaking, sharper the pencil. So having prefaced my comment in that manner that you've done both, if you don't mind, I'll go through our presentation, and if you have any questions, please feel free to ask them. As I mentioned, public sale, competitive or negotiated. You could actually hire a banker also to take your bonds to market. We frankly have not done that because you don't need to. It's not, your general obligation bonds are well understood. It's a full faith and credit pledge. Generally speaking, jurisdictions like yourselves, which are rated in the AA category as you are well received in the open market. So a negotiated transaction is not necessary. In other words, hiring an investment banking firm, underwriting firm first. So we offer the bonds in the public market. Bonds pay for your capital projects and for the cost of issuance associated. In an official statement, which is what happens with a public sale, the list of projects are provided and the dollar amounts for the projects. This is not really an extensive effort, if you will, because you have a capital improvement program that is 5 years in length. What, generally speaking, you try to issue bonds when there is a sufficient amount of projects required, and you put it together. Again, what you're going to hear me talk about is the difference between the public sale and a private placement. And that number, or that method, is generated primarily based on the dollar amount you're going to borrow. One method is more cost effective than another, depending on the size of the bond issue or the dollar amounts of projects that you're going to borrow for. Participants are listed on this page. As you can see, the public sale has a lot more participants in the transaction. You all, bond counsel, ourselves, are the same in both cases. When you do a public sale, we need to get the rating agencies involved, because they're the ones who they provide the credit quality. And that's what bidders bid on. They bid on the name of the city of Hagerstown, its strong financial performance, its management, a number of factors I'll talk about, but they need to see that. And the rating agencies put out reports that talk about yourselves. The other folks are just other participants. Private placement, there's really only 3 plus A bidders, which are the banks. Documents, well, you can see the list is a little bit longer for a public sale versus a private placement. And in the public methodology, you all would end up, generally, city manager, finance director, would end up talking to the rating agencies to get an update, give an update on the city of Hagerstown's position. Yes, they can read much of what's going on in documents, and they do follow you. They read the newspapers. They are sitting on your shoulders somewhat, unbeknownst to yourselves, because they do follow what you do. So it's usually a multiple hour discussion with each of the rating agencies. You use 2 out of 3 rating agencies. And that's the process. Private placement, they just really rely on the documents. They don't very much talk to you at all. It's nothing personal. It's just simply it's a smaller group of folks, and they're driven very much by your existing rating and what they read in the documents, because they do their own credit evaluation. And as I said earlier, there are fewer folks who want to bid on your bonds. It's not you as City of Hagerstown, it's entities that have smaller transactions, and their organizations are requiring more often involvement with that institution on a greater level than just buying bonds. Greater level means, do they have a depository agreement with you in some instances? Some firms have dropped out of bidding on these private placements entirely. It's nothing you all are doing, it's the market. Public sale requirements, as stated before, this is really the steps you have to go through, which I've just outlined. Private placement, again, much simpler. And cost of issuance is normally covered by the bond issue itself. In other words, it's not a budgetary item per se. It's as part of the borrowing cost of doing the transaction. Again, private placement costs are smaller, or in general, than a public sale, because in theory there's less work to do. Also, you don't have to pay a rating agency, you don't have to pay bond printing. There's a number of costs that you do not incur when you do a private placement. But the interest rate charged in the private placement, which is the operative number, is oftentimes higher than in a public sale. What happens is that the break even is in how much you are borrowing. In our case, when we evaluated you all, if you're borrowing less than $3 million, a private placement, assuming everybody, the folks bid on it, is less costly because of that cost of issuance spread against the interest rate. Public sale, cost of issuance is higher, but the interest rate is lower. So once you essentially go over a $3 million mark, and I'm using that, don't hold me to it as an exact number, but it moves back and forth a bit, then the interest rate being lower offsets the cost of issuance and also allows you in a public sale to issue it for a longer period of time. Again, with the folks who are interested in placements, they don't generally want to go out 20 years. 15 years tends to be their maximum. There'll be an exception to that. But to maximize the amount of bidders, again, even though the bidder number is small, you try to comply with what they're looking for. In other words, so we don't skew it to, we really only have one bidder. That may happen, but you certainly don't want to put in a position where that's the only outcome that is likely to occur. That's just not something we like to do. Also, because the city of Hagerstown generally issues under $10 million a year, there is a category called bank qualified, meaning banks can put these bonds in their portfolio, and that too lowers the cost. Now that happens on both sides, private placement as well as a public sale. In point of fact, on a private placement side, if you were not bank qualified, we probably couldn't do a private placement at all. You would not have interest.
Why don't you define bank qualified?
It's a tax advantage for the banks, and if it's above 10, even in a public sale, banks may or may not bid on it themselves, or may be part of a solicitation, a bid to you all. You may not even see their name. They may be one of the buyers, and so it allows for more people to participate, more people, institutions to bid on, and our goal generally, not generally speaking, is almost always to provide the lowest cost of financing possible. So we have found that the more bidders that bid on your bonds or any of our clients that we represent, more bidders mean lower cost. So it's a mechanism that just generates it. But without it, the banks would not be interested at all. And they have been the primary bidders. And it's only a few of them. As I said, it's not, when we're going through a situation right now with a client who wants to place it with a local bank, and their interest rate is much higher than in the public market. And part of the reasons it's much higher is because they don't really take in the bonds themselves. They need to go through another party. So they have to increase the cost. And that too is
Isn't there a tax exemption involved as well?
a tax exemption is, yes, that's across the
Changes
board.
the rate.
Well, tax exemption, if you've only once in part issued bonds that were not tax exempt. We go with the supposition, the purpose that all your bonds are tax exempt. If they weren't, we would sell a portion of bonds that were not tax exempt.
Right.
Lindsay Rader, who's your bond counsel, would be opining on that which has to be tax exempt versus that which would be taxable. In point of fact, a number of years ago, there were what they called Build America bonds, and the bonds were sold on a taxable basis. The federal subsidy, which is what was based on, when you included the federal subsidy, the cost of a taxable issuance versus a tax-exempt issuance was lower. Now we know that the federal government hasn't been paying their subsidy, so that brings new color to the issue. But at this moment, for the most part, until the call date when the bonds can be advanced, refunded, or refunded. It's not quite cost effective to take them out with refunding bonds. Should they tax exempt refunding bonds? As soon as the numbers work in your favor, well, I'm sure we will bring it to your attention, and you can decide then if you wish to pay off the existing obligation with refunding bonds, which would be tax exempt, and that would take out the taxable purpose bonds. Just as a comparative, on the next page we've presented to you differences in costs, and we're assuming different interest rates of 3, 3.5, and 4% for the different dollar amounts and years, just to give you a for what it's worth type of comparative. In choosing a bond sale methodology, and I think I've tried to make that pretty clear, the public sale gives you a lower interest rate, gives you more flexibility in amortization. You can, various sizes of bonds are easily, and more bidders. In private placement, the benefit is lower cost, easier to undertake. Generally speaking, as I said before, 15 years or less. Lower documentation, interest cost, which is higher than a public sale, but as I said, there's a break-even point. That's an absolute dollar and cent piece, and the number of bidders are limited. The next portion is to talk a little bit about the rating agencies and what they look at, because that does drive your interest rate, that drives everything that's related to a sale of bonds, whether they are tax exempt, taxable, a general obligation bond, which is the full faith and credit of the city of Hagerstown, or even a revenue bond. I mean, not even, a revenue bond. Everything is driven by how the rating agencies evaluate the city of Hagerstown. They look at 4 primary areas: finance, debt management, and economy, some of which you control, some of which you don't. The ones you control is everything but the economy. You can do things to try to stimulate it, but generally speaking, it's a slow-moving effort, and no governmental can change the status of the economy between today and tomorrow, or today and the next 2 or 3 years. So they look at it over a very long-term period, and they look for consistency in the economy, and they do evaluate it. And the criteria that they use is the same for you as it is for every issuer in the United States. It does not change. It is absolutely the same. The rating criteria for finances, I guess the biggest points are reserves, that you're maintaining solid reserves. They do have some percentages that they care about. More is getting to be better. It's interesting to me, we do a good deal of work in Delaware as well as here. It is interesting from my perspective that the amount of reserves that county governments have are almost 100% of expenditures, where in Maryland, reserves are 5 to 20% of expenditures. Now, part of that is due, Maryland's considered a wealthier state by a good amount. But when you go down below it, you'll see that reserves outside of Maryland are generally much higher for a comparably rated community as the city of Hagerstown. You'll see reserves that are 30 and 40%, if not greater. Not to scare you, just simply that's a representation of the higher quality of the financial management, which is yourselves, and what they think of as also stronger economy, so that there's things that you can do to manage your finances more easily, perhaps, than some of the jurisdictions in other states, which may not have your income levels. And I'm not suggesting you have to be wealthy to get a good rating, but how you manage over a long period of time is looked at. So that's a major consideration. Debt also is a very small, generally speaking, a small number considered as part of your budget, which is also a major criteria. The general fund is evaluated as stated. They look at tax rates. They look at everything you do. There is nothing they don't look at. Debt, as I said, the debt in Maryland and Europe for sure, debt is retired within 10 years. 50% is retired within 10 years. Usually it's even 60 or 70%. Some folks are a little bit higher. They look at your capital improvement program. They really want to know what your plans are. They also want to know that when you say you're going to do something, you do it. You can always do less, but they do look at what you plan to do budgetarily, capital improvement wise, and the outgrowth of that is debt, and their policies and procedures. They very much evaluate how you do things on an ongoing basis. And with that, as has been a bigger issue as of late, has certainly cost of pensions, healthcare funding, and the like, because those are ongoing obligations that continue. Rating management. Bruce and Michelle will get calls at least once a year from the rating agencies talking about what you all are doing. Please don't consider them rude that they don't call each of you respectively, but they do call. Right. You may not want to do their phone calls anyway, but it's usually pretty technical. They're asking for updates. As I said, they're asking a series of questions that are based on all the documentation that they already have. They go to your website, they get a copy of your budget, they look at your CAFR, they look at your capital plan, they look at any policies and procedures, they look at all of that almost every year. And your management team gets calls on it. And while I say Bruce and Michelle, it's 99% of the time the calls go into city manager or an administrator and director of finance and budget. That's where the call goes. It never goes anyplace else.
Appropriately so.
That's why you hire them. And like I said, everybody's treated the same. There's no exception, if you will. What the phone call or the rating meeting allows you to do is explain what you're doing. Gives them a context to evaluate, are these folks managing well? Which arguably you could suggest is a subjective discussion. But it becomes less subjective if they're using the same criteria to evaluate managements across the United States. It's not, like I said before, it's not just you, it's everyone. And they've gone to great steps to try to formalize their evaluation of management. There are specific things they look for. And in some instances, not in some instances, the short answer, generally speaking, is if you tell them something in document or in voice, they expect you to do it. They really, if you don't, it's, I can't say it's a check mark per se, but that's how they feel through, if you will, this, what I think is a subjective evaluation. But it's very much part and parcel of what they do. Economy, even if the city of Hagerstown doesn't go to market every year, which it does not, Washington County does. And Washington County is your economy as well. So they're evaluated every year. They're talked to the county once a year religiously. Whether it's a formal meeting or conference calls. And as well, they're looking, as I said before, all of the same things. Nothing changes. And they're very sensitive to exactly what's going on in the state. There are no surprises. Even if we had a client one time who said, "Oh, I don't have to tell them that." Well, I said, "They already know." I said, "How do you mean they already know?" He says, "Well, you didn't tell them, but 15 other jurisdictions did. So you're the one who's not, don't worry about it, they'll already know." In the conversation, it says, "Well, they didn't tell you who they spoke to, but it was the other 15. So it really doesn't matter." And I think that basically summarizes the conversation, if you will, on bond sales. And yes, sir, Mr. Martin.
Could I just ask two questions?
Sure,
please?
sir.
First, what happens if you do a private financing and no lender shows up?
Then I have to come and then we go out for public bid.
Okay. And is there any kind of a prejudice if you keep switching back and forth between the two markets? Like if you do private 1 year and you do public a couple of years later, then you go back and do private. Is there any kind of jealousy?
No, there's no, no. I mean, again, we give you recommendations based on cost.
Yeah, okay.
And it's driven, frankly, that's the first item. Is there reasons to do it another way other than just pure on a cost? Yeah, there's also business reasons. I need the money now. I need to, I don't want to do this or that. There are solid business reasons to not do a full public sale. Absolutely, regardless of the dollar amount you're borrowing.
Mm-hmm.
But going back and forth, no. Your first question is really the one that bothers me all the time, because we evaluate constantly how many bidders we're going to have, who's going to show up. We can't guarantee they're going to show up.
Sure.
So that is a problem. That's a challenge for us. If we came back, next week and said, we just don't have enough bidders, or we think that's a possibility, or somebody may not bid, or you may only get one bid, and we can't guarantee that you're going to. We're going to say, despite the fact that it costs you somewhat more to do a public sale, we say, well, that way we know we get bidders.
Right.
But generally, we're driven by, let's not try to drive you crazy.
So, and this is the move from a public sale to private sale, I just want to make sure everyone's clear, is because we've reduced the amount of borrowing for next year, or for this year, from the water fund reserves, move some projects, the funding of those projects from the water reserves and the general fund surplus to reduce the amount of borrowing, which is why you're now, and the staff is now recommending the private sale.
That's correct, Mr.
Correct. Originally, in our budget, we were looking at about $4.2 million, and that was actually in the ordinance that was passed back in early spring. And now we're at about $1.65 million for the projects that we're looking to actually still finance. There were all of the ones within the water fund, a little over $1 million is all going to be done through the water fund reserves, paid for in that manner.
When you use the term private placement financing,
Yes, sir.
are you indicating that it is something different than tax-exempt bond financing?
No, it is
So
tax
it's
exempt.
still the same, so it wouldn't matter when we refinance, or if we were to refinance and consolidate, older bond
Right.
debt, whether it was secured through the private placement financing process versus the general bond obligation tax-exempt process.
Yeah, there's
correct?
exactly. Both are general obligation bonds.
Mm-hmm.
Both are secured by the same pledge. One is no different than the other.
Okay.
Tax exempt is no different in this case, one to the other. It's only one essentially comes down to, we're going to produce an official statement, which we're going to publish and distribute to 1,000 possible bidders, though there will probably only be
3 or 4.
7 or 9 in a public sale, versus we're not going to publish an official statement. We're not going to go to the rating agencies. We are going to solicit bids. We know that there's probably not going to be more than 2 to 4 bidders, and we also know that the interest rate cost will be somewhat higher, but the cost of putting it all together is lower. So there is a break-even dollar amount.
Right. So you're saying we don't need to secure a new rating, that we can rely on the existing
That's what the
rating?
that's what the bidders will ask for.
Right, and that's part of the closing cost savings
Yes, sir.
and so forth, no OS.
That's correct.
If we go with this process, well, I'll save that question for later. I think that, it makes sense to me. The question I really want to get at is, and I don't think we've brought it out enough, is we're able to do this, and we're able to do this at a reasonable interest rate that makes it affordable because we've done good management, because we have our financial position is strong and secure. And I think it needs to be emphasized that we're financing projects that have a life of at least the 15 years, but in many cases much longer, so that taxpayers are, over the years, are paying for it instead of just the taxpayers now. I think that's something that people, just like a home mortgage,
Correct.
and I know that sounds simplistic, but a lot of people don't understand that we're legitimately spreading the costs, and we're paying for it at a reasonably low interest rate, which we can secure because of the tax exempt provisions in the tax code. And I'm saying all that because you can't emphasize it enough, and you can't emphasize that we're able to do it because we've worked hard to maintain a strong financial position. You recommended the strong reserves as more and more important than it used to be.
Yes, sir.
And we've done, as you well know, we've been doing that.
Everything you say is correct. I mean, the cost of borrowing has been remarkably low for a protracted period of time. I mean, it used to be, we thought 5% was low. The average borrowing was, well, we borrowed at 7, we borrowed at 10. The mortgage rates, as you say, is something of comparable. You're going to borrow around 3% for 15 years. That's a remarkable interest rate. And in a certain time frame, we'll probably put in an opportunity for you to refund the bonds. Though I have to tell you that the likelihood of getting a lower rate sometime in the future is somewhat overly optimistic. Does it happen?
We should borrow more now?
What I will say, a finance director, my first finance director that I worked with in the state of Maryland, said you can't look back and you can't look forward. You have to go when you're ready, borrow for what you need. Hopefully, don't question yourself in that way. But certainly, the market speaks for what the costs are. Guessing the market in the future, we never do that. Gosh knows, folks ask us, and the regular answer is, if we could tell you, we could really do something special, but we can't.
Well, you can. When it's at 7 and 8%, you may not be able to. When you start getting down near 0, you can pretty accurately say that the chances of it going lower are pretty slim.
Yes.
And in all seriousness, it begs the question of some of the things in the future that we know we're going to have to do that we bond finance a lot, like road resurfacing is an example. And I don't have an answer, but I understand what you're saying, but I also understand that when you get down to 3% area, let me put it this way. You have very little downside if you're wrong. It's very little downside. If you go from 3% and you find out you could have gotten it 2%, you're not in real bad shape. But if you go for 3% and find out that it's now 6%, so I think it merits thought process. That's all I would say. And not to go crazy, but it merits thought process.
On that point, if I could, Michelle and I had a lot of discussion both with Les and Susan in his office, Lindsay, our bond counsel, because one of the things they emphasized to us is, you've got to have a defined project.
Definitely.
Because we've tried to fish out the timing on things. We've talked about MELP, we've talked about stormwater, we've talked about pavement preservation, we've talked about possibly doing something downtown, and that all would involve bond financing, but we don't have a defined project yet or a defined schedule.
Fully understand.
So
Those are things we would have to work on.
Right, but we have the same thought, and keep in mind that right now we're scheduling a bond issue for 2014.
Right.
Later in this year, we talked about the ladder truck in the fire department last month. We've got some other things planned, so we'll be back. The issue on timing too is this list of the 1.6 that we've got on the attachment. Most of those are done or in process, but we need to get the money in place to fund.
Fire trucks are a good example, though. That's one discussion we're having right now, whether we buy two at the same time or not. And so
Right.
There's a very interesting discussion, which we could save money by not purchasing the two right now and finding out that all the money we save, we end up with an increase in the borrowing cost a year or two down the road.
There's
The other
also
thing I
just
should-
another point. I apologize, but if you've already start spending money for some of these projects, there is a schedule, there's a time frame that if you do not reimburse yourselves with bond proceeds, you cannot. Whatever money you spent it out of budget, and you cannot recover it through a bond issue. So there is a time frame that Lindsay would expound upon greatly, but there's a way of calculating it, and it's no longer than 18 months, and it's a rolling period. So it is something it's prudent to be conscious of. There have been occasions where folks spend the money, they wait too long, they can't reimburse themselves. It has a true budgetary impact greater than what they plan for. I mean, you plan for budgets that you don't have surprises. If this is something that shows up, a nominal amount of money, and I use the term, you would each define nominal by a different description, I'm sure, can be a surprise that you don't wish to have. So that too, all of this is based on planning.
But at the same time, you have to spend the proceeds within a certain, looking ahead.
Yes, sir.
If you issue too many bonds for things that are ill-defined and not likely to get off the ground, you're stuck holding those bonds without,
Actually, it's even worse.
Yeah.
But
It's
it's even worse.
compliance is now.
It's even worse than that. You need to be in compliance. You don't. Let me not sound so pejorative. You don't borrow money that you don't have projects for.
Right.
You can't.
That you're ready to start.
Ready to start, get and go. Pretty much shovel ready. I mean, you could say that, we look at it sort of in a 2-year spend down. It's actually longer than that. But if you're reimbursing yourselves, that 2 years can become 3. So you really want to get it done at an appropriate time. And I really lean back on what this director of finance told me. He said, you got to go when you're ready. Don't look back. Don't look forward. If you have to do it at another time for another piece, then do it then when you also have solid. Trying to chase the interest rate is not. I mean, but to give you an example, follow up, Mr. Metzner, on your comment about low interest rate, we have one very large client who borrows a very large amount of money, and actually has what they call variable rate debt. They paid this past week 0.4 basis points on their borrowing. And they've been paying less than 15 basis points for the past year and a half. I'm not suggesting that. I'm just saying, you're right. It's almost zero.
Yeah. But I think we decided to go the conservative way rather than.
Please do.
We are.
Yeah.
And the big
We
issue
made
that's come
that
up very
decision.
recently is the trucks.
Well, the variable rate is not a good way for you to go.
No,
It's
no.
too costly
I
for
would-
you
I
to
would
do.
not consider
Because
that.
there's a lot of upfront costs and stuff.
I would not do that in my private life. I would not do it in my.
The other point I wanted to make is just to acknowledge Mike and Nancy. their management of the water fund, water operations, because that's helped Michelle and I in freeing up money to fund $1.9 million in water system improvements out of the reserve, as opposed to issuing bonds or debt for those projects. So they need to be acknowledged for their efforts in the water operations side and their help on capital improvement project management and funding.
I'm not sure whether you want to comment on this, but my judgment is that we retain a pretty strong capacity should we need to move or want to move forward with some large projects. Our capacity remains fairly strong.
Yes, it
fair
does.
to say?
Yes,
It's like
it
our
does.
financial management. So if we wanted or needed or could find a way to finance the debt service on a large project or had contributing factors and had a way to do it, we would have the capacity.
Yes, sir. And actually, sort of tied my hands here, but I said here, in the document it says, please, debt service, annual debt service, should not really be much more than 10 to 12% of budget.
We're at 7.
And you're at 7.
Yeah.
And when you include pension obligations, you get up to maybe 20, 22, 23%. So there's a barometer, if you will, a measurement that you can look at. I'm not suggesting you go to that measurement. I'm just sharing with you there is a measurement, and you can use it as a guide to how you do this. Your other point, Mr. Brubaker, was we don't borrow for longer than the useful life of the project. That tax council actually looks very badly upon. We don't do that under a tax exempt project.
Right. Well, I was stressing, though, that the projects are designed to last longer than that.
Absolutely.
And just like you pay with your home, and the initial financing allows you to buy that home, then you pay it over a period of time, and your home's still there. And that's essentially what we're doing.
Yes, sir.
So let's get a quick thumbs up, thumbs down. Is everyone okay with moving forward with the staff's recommendation for the private placement? Yeah, we got 2 thumbs up. Penny, you're okay. Kristen, Marty. All right.
To do that, we'll be back with a resolution for mayor and council approval.
Do we want to do that as a special session, or?
I think if we do it later this month, if we can work it out we'll have to work with
Depends on how
Lindsay
much
on the
timing.
legislation,
Okay.
Lester on the timing, and my guess is later this month, first of next month, maybe.
Candidly, once you've made the decision, the sooner is better.
Okay. So we'll get going on it.
Thank you very much.
My
Thanks for your
pleasure.
presentation.
Thanks,
My
Lester.
pleasure anytime.
Safe travels.
Yeah, thank you.
I do want to recognize we have County Commissioner Ruth Ann Callahan in our audience today. Thanks for being here. I know you guys canceled your evening meeting, so thanks for coming.
I always come and listen to the finance stuff. I learn so much. Thank you.
We have our water and wastewater rates 5-year rate plan. Mike Spiker and our other guests are joining us here at the table.
Good evening. The memo that we have in front of you is from basically from the questions that were posed at our November meeting, put together by staff. We did some reworking of the executive summary, and we'll go through some of the pages in that we made the changes on. Not to go through all the pages again, because a lot of the information didn't change. But just to go quickly, I think when we met last time, I think we were in agreement that the request for the water increase of 2% per year is not a major issue at this point in time. It's a wastewater proposal we have in front of you that we've spent all of our time on. So that's how we'll just continue with this process if everyone's fine with water. Okay, thank you. Once again, we'd like to, if we could, complete the process itself and have a definitive answer so we can move forward with the budget in late February or March. Will, I think, allow us enough time to get everything in, Michelle, for us to do our financial projections and finalize our budget needs for the next 5 years. The previously approved increases, it's basically what happened to the 5%. We did show an operating deficit in water for the first 3 or 4 years of that, and of course it cash strapped our CIP, and we deferred some CIPs to the out years. Is a reason we have some of that build up that we're showing now that may looks like we've driven up our request for a percentage increase, but it is from some of the deferred projects that we had before. And how could we smooth the increases or change the CIP or operating costs? Our operating costs, our fixed charges are running anywhere from the high 80s to the low 90s, depending upon what month it is. So we really have a small, narrow band where we can actually make any adjustments basically in that 10% area. And those are mostly basically in labor charges and some other small charges that we can make some changes to. For alternatives, and I did give you a handout there. We did add the fourth alternative to that later for when we get to that. But we did our recommended 3-year alternatives. We added the fiscal year 14 information in for the council, which basically goes through and shows it wasn't a big change to our sewer cash balance request for what we need to reserve for operational. Sewer fund rate increase scenarios, once again, is what I gave a handout. What I didn't have and we didn't discuss before, didn't actually have in the list, was a true blending of a 5% increase and then 4% for the last year, because we're looking for a total 24% over 5 years. If you look at the bottom, scenario number 4 for the level phase-in, our cash position in fiscal year 15 and 16 is a negative, so which really straps us even more. And when you look at the end for fiscal year 19, we're going to basically gather 52% of our minimum cash balance reserve if we would look at a true blending. A request was made to look back at our actual versus our projected expenses and our revenues. We've put together to show you in our user charges and our benefit charges what our deficit actually was in regard to our projected versus our actual revenues.
Mike, you're on page 2 now.
Yes, sir. I apologize. I'm on page 2 now, right in the center. We do our annual projections, a lot of variables for whether we meet our projections, our actual revenue projections or not. Basically sales, weather is our main component for what we have on that conservation. So as you can see, for the wastewater fund, our revenues versus our projections for the 4-year period that we looked at were $1.4 million in the red. And benefit charges were $1.2 million less than we had actually projected. Our net revenue of our expenses, and I didn't put it in the chart, but from fiscal year 10 to 14, it basically ran plus 612,000, a negative 548, a negative 198, and a positive 189. So they kind of blend out fairly well on that. Our CIP costs, I just pulled out for what was approved, basically just a copy out of the budget book for right now for what we have approved CIP. And it does match up for what we have in the executive summary and in our other attached documents with that, except that in our study we did increase our CIP for the Synagro project from the new contract that we did with them. That was not in the approved budget for last year. It'll be in as a request and shown in the budget for this year. I guess the telling tale when you look at comparisons, everybody likes to look at comparisons, how we do with other municipalities. And for me, our inside city rate, we've all discussed about how reasonable the rate is for that. For fiscal year 14, which is where we're at now, 13,000 gallons per quarter, our inside customers are paying $100.18. At our current request of using the increases for our scenario number 1, inside city rates at the end of that 5-year period would be $122. I used the local cities and towns who are commensurate to us, plus the 2 that we sell to. They're about our size, and the customers pretty good for comparison wise. Our closest competitor is the city of Frostburg at $163, and it runs all the way to $239.
And the numbers in red at the top are with the increases.
This is with
over
the
time.
increase, and then I just, for dramatic effect, did not show any percentage rate increase for them. At the end of fiscal year 19, we're still $40 less than our closest competitor, which is Frostburg, at $163.
Assuming they have no
Assuming they
install.
assuming they do no increases whatsoever at a 5-year period.
Why did you choose 13,000 gallons? What's the...
Well, our actual residential customer is about 8,500. We used 13,000 in the past. It was an average of our industrial, commercial, and our residential groups together. So we just, for us internal, we just kind of show it that way because it's an overall comparison of the whole system. Once again, when we look into the actual executive summary, our 8,500 gallon customer, it's like $90 versus $109.61. So
Right,
it's really not an apples to apples. We just try to keep it with consistency.
So at the present time, the people of the city of Hagerstown who are on this, who are on this service now are $116 less than Cumberland.
Yes, sir.
A city of not too dissimilar size.
Yes, sir.
And even if Cumberland doesn't do anything in terms of raising costs, and the city does, will still be nearly $100. It would be $94
Yes,
less
sir.
in fiscal 19.
Yes, sir. That is correct.
That's per quarter.
That's
And
per
that's per
quarter.
quarter.
That's per quarter. Yes, sir.
Gee, that's a good reason to live in Hagerstown, isn't it?
Yes, sir. It is one more reason. We all agree.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. Thank you. And then I'm on top of page 3 now. We just use the outside city rate. And I think you're all aware, we've discussed it before, the difference for inside city rate, outside city rate. For the inside city rate, we're operating on a cash basis, which is basically income recorded when it comes in, expenses are recorded as cash expense when it goes out. So it's cash in, cash out. For the utility basis, which is for our outside rates, we have a rate of return that is built in to our rate structure on that. So we actually look at the value of the assets that's required to give customer service that are farther away from our city core. Hence the reason the outside rates are a little bit higher. We used, once again, out of the same group that truly have outside city rates. That's why the numbers are a little bit smaller. And I did the same extrapolation, used us, taking us through fiscal year 19, not making any movement whatsoever in the other groups. And at the end of fiscal year 19, as you can see, we're still $100 less than Funkstown's outside city rates. We would be 19 cents higher than Winchester for the outside rates, but would probably be pretty sure that their rates may go up a little bit between now and then. But we are in the ballpark for outside city rates with our other groups. There's not that great disparity that we see with some of the other
So
groups
many
on the
other
inside
of these
rates.
jurisdictions have outside jurisdiction rates.
Correct. Yes. Yeah, those are the 4 that are closest to us out of the group that we used.
Mike, just noticed this. The rates from 14 to 15 on page 2 go up from $100 to 109 and something. And yet you're saying there's a 12% rate increase. That's not 12%.
It's 12% per year, and this is a quarter, plus it's blended water and wastewater. So it's not going to be...
Okay, it's the blend.
It's the blended rate.
It's the blended
Yes, sir,
rate.
it's the
That's your
blended
answer,
rate.
blended rate.
Yes,
Okay.
sir.
So the rate that the increase that people will see on their bills is 9%. About 9%.
Yes, sir.
And then lower rates. So I think that's where we need to need to say the rates are the blended rate, not because it seems like we're raising the whole thing 12% to
Correct.
people. That's the perception.
It is not. That is correct.
And we're not.
Right.
And I think that's the number the blended rate number as a percent is. I mean, I realize the one factor is going 12 and the other is being held steady.
Right.
But that is not where I think we should be, because that's not what you're going to see in your billing
Correct.
statement.
It's not what you're going to see. Actually,
In your billing statement, you'll see 9% and you'll see less than these other percents.
Yes, sir.
So Marty, you're supporting scenario number 1.
Well, I haven't said that yet, but I'm just saying that is what we need to say is your total rate that you see on your bills going up 9% and other percents that you could calculate for these other years.
Yes.
Is there a blended rate percent charge?
I did it for fiscal year 15 and fiscal year 19. Down in the second chart, I did, you can see the inside city rate, what goes up 9.4, and then actually after
Right,
5
the
years, you've seen a total combination of 22%, and outside's 20%. Once again, the rate
Those are the real,
differential
but to
kicks
me,
in.
that's the real number.
Yes, sir, that is the real number.
What your bill goes up, not what one part of it goes up, and I don't think we emphasize, I think what people have seen is the 12 and all that, when it's really 9.4, I was ballparking that, but I'm pretty close, and other numbers adding up to 22% over, let's see, that inside city, that 22% is total beyond FY14?
Yes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it takes it right to 19, so it's a 5-year out.
Well, it would be, because you have 24% here for 5. And
correct.
Okay, because somebody could see that as beyond FY15, and that's not the case.
And right, and we say 24%, that's overall between the inside and outside city rate, so you don't get a true
I guess I'd like to
numbers.
see the numbers out year to year, the blended rate, and I think that's what we ought to say is happening here. You know, your bill will see less than 10% one year, and then less than 4 another year if we go with that, the scenario that the mayor keeps trying to get me to agree with.
Well, that's what staff is recommending, and I support what they're recommending.
When you go down to the third chart,
they know what they're doing.
You do kind of see the narrowing of the band. And what I did on the third chart is looking at fiscal year 15 water and wastewater. Once again, inside city rate 109.61. That's using a 12% wastewater and a 2%. If we go all the way to the opposite end of the spectrum, blending it out 5, 5, 5, and 4, which of course puts us in a negative cash, it's only $5 less per quarter. So it's really minimal amount you're talking about there to get us up where we're financially where we should be in the wastewater division.
And I think I want to emphasize that the outside rate in this case, because you're starting from a higher base, is really the reason.
Yes, sir.
I mean, it's going up, is 8.6%, it's less than the inside city rate.
Correct.
And the same with
the
cumulative rate. I think that's the number we need to be using. What's going to happen to your bill?
Mike, to get down to the charts on page 1 and 2, which I think is where the mayor's trying to go. Obviously, people who live in the city of Hagerstown don't really much care what the people who are living in other areas have to pay.
Agreed.
They care about what they have to pay. Now, there are 3 alternatives. I think alternative number 3 is a real non-starter.
It's really the same increase.
Leaving 1 and 2. But if we should select 2, as I understand it, then we're going to be in a position of having to borrow money?
No, we would not.
I think the issue is the cash reserve balance.
That's exactly what we're looking at, just what it does place us for a cash balance. For scenario 2, we would go a 10, 4, 4, 4, and 2.
If you look at, just to point out, in fiscal year 15 under scenario number 1, your cash balance at the end of 15 we're estimating would be $570,000.
Right.
If you go with scenario 2, because we're only doing a 10% increase instead of the 12%, we're estimating your cash balance would be $350,000. So you're just riding a thinner band there in terms of cash reserves.
Can you explain the column minimum cash balance millions? For scenario 1, which you only show it for 1, but I'm assuming it's for 2 as well, where you're trying to get to the 3.15 million.
Yeah, what we've said as a minimum cash balance would be 2 months of your operating expenses plus 1% of the replacement cost of your assets.
So under option 1, we would be at 20% or 1/5 of 2 months, 3 weeks.
Correct.
Of operating reserves. And under option 2, we would be at about 2 weeks of operating reserves.
Correct.
And both get us to 100%. in the same time frame
Correct.
over the next 4-year period.
Correct. The only difference is that scenario 1 is slightly more conservative. If there's unforeseen expenses, $200,000 cost comes along in 15 that you weren't anticipating, that really eats into the cash versus, if you have 350 versus 570. Ultimately, it's a timely discussion with what Lester was mentioning. We're trying to get the sewer fund to where the water fund is, where you have a reasonable cash balance.
The difference to our customers and actual cash payments between scenario 1 and 2 are de minimis.
$3 a month.
Yeah, I mean,
They really are.
Right, and the rate that they're going to see is really less than that 12%. I mean, that's what we need. It's 9 point
it's
whatever
9.6%.
is what the bill is going to change.
Well, and then it's whatever
that
water
gets
you
into
use.
the old theory.
Well, yes,
what
but
we
I'm
built.
talking about this average. I'm talking about the 13,000. I don't know where what it would be for the 8,500, but the blended rate, nevertheless, is significantly less.
So this might be a helpful slide. If you look at the third line down, that's your average residential customer. This is an inside city customer with a 5/8 inch meter using 8,500 gallons a quarter. Their current bill, water and sewer combined, as it stands today, is $73.95. With that 2% increase in water rates, 12% increase in sewer rates, that's about a $7 increase per quarter. And then as you go on out to fiscal year 19, as Mike mentioned earlier, it'd be about $90. But you can see year over year, once you get over that initial hump in 15, it's less than $3, and then it goes down to less than $2 per quarter of an increase.
So for me, I use about 13,000, family of 5. I'll be paying $20 more per quarter 5 years from now than I do right now.
Correct.
Right. You got it.
Or about $7 more a month.
No, $80 a year, $20 a month. Those are quarterly bills.
Yeah, I was doing the 122.
Oh, okay, gotcha. Okay, understood.
Yeah, the lower than inflation will be.
Well, I'm for option 1.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, we're sitting here debating over, the price of a cup of coffee.
Well, what you're debating over is a small amount of money to our customers for a large impact on our fund. That's the difference.
Yeah.
And it seems to make no sense to do anything else. Just sounds politically expedient because the percentage numbers are lower, but the actual real dollar figures are absolutely de minimis.
We'll make that up in the difference in interest rate ability when we borrow.
When we borrow money.
3 years from now.
As
for
you can
some
see,
expense.
what it allowed us to do in the water fund is thank you for before. It does allow us much greater flexibility with our financial situation and not have to go out and take any more long-term debt. Utilize some cash for that to get us in the same space.
That if something really happens that's bad, you're going to have to borrow money.
Right, absolutely.
Under B and
Right.
C.
And we'll have some money built up in the 3R reserve because we're going to collect some of our 3R reserve money to get us over a small hump like that if we need to.
And the bottom line is you guys have always done an excellent job of managing the water and wastewater utilities, and nobody recognizes government until something breaks. And, so the last thing we want is to be in the position where, we're going to have to go out and borrow money and make it, have a more expensive project because we're trying to save money on the front end.
And that's what I say, Mayor. Councilmember Brubaker's right. Nobody's concerned about what the other people are paying as long as they're paying more than we are. But as soon as we're the ones paying the most, everybody's pointing out, wants to make comparisons.
Right.
Well, I just think that we need to have a chart that shows what the increase in rate, showing the water fund as well, and what the real rate is that people will see on the thing. That to me is the critical number. And I don't think people care whether it's we care, but the citizen cares about what their increase is, not where it's coming from.
Right.
So that's the number that needs to go across here. Increase to average water bill or increase to whatever it is, and for all the individual years, not just the 5-year total. And that's the number that needs to be seen, because that's the real thing we're approving. By good management, you're able to hold the water fund constant. Well, let's take credit for that.
But a percentage figure for me as a ratepayer, if you tell me it's 9% or 12%, that could mean 100 different numbers. For me, it's how much more money you're taking out of my wallet.
Well, then you do both. You get the
And for me, I like to see that what you're taking out of my wallet more
$20
each quarter is, for me, about
Marty,
$9.
isn't this chart right here?
I agree with Kristen. I don't disagree with Kristen. Let's do both numbers, because I like to see percents, but Kristen's exactly right. But why can't we do both?
So it sounds like we have a consensus then to move forward with scenario one.
Let's move it. Let's
We
move
do, but
forward.
I need to ask one more question.
That's a question, too.
But with those numbers being what we're doing when we approve it.
Yes, sir.
The situation you had this morning on Pennsylvania Avenue,
Yes, sir.
that cost somebody something. Would that affect our cash fund balance, or could a series of situations like that affect our cash fund balance?
If we would see issues that involved continual transmission main problems, which is our big dollar repairs, which run in the tens of thousands of dollars, it could. And then once again, that's where our 3 R's build up. In the water side, we're fine at the moment for that. We can weather basically a spate of large transmission breaks and still cover it without any issue. Yeah, financially, we can weather those.
Well, you provide a certain amount in
Yes,
this
we
year's
do.
budget.
Absolutely.
And the problem
Absolutely.
is if you have too many of those circumstances, that's when it hits them.
And, we need to say
not
whatever
over.
there is appropriate to say to the crews around at 7 this morning and 20-degree wind chill fixing water lines. It's,
They're still there.
out.
Yeah, we're still doing
So
some work.
alternative one makes complete and total sense.
Yes.
And make sure that people understand, I think that chart about other cities, you need to put an asterisk so people, we're used to reading charts. And I saw that right, I said, wow, they held it constant. But you just see that it's almost impossible that their rates will be constant.
Exactly.
Somehow you need to point that out, because some people won't see that.
Yes, sir. Yeah. Once again, it was my dramatic effect to show that they didn't.
Right.
do
Right.
anything
Well,
with it.
yeah, it is, but we need to make sure people see that, because anybody with any understanding knows that those rates won't stay constant.
Absolutely.
In your presentation, page 3, bullet point 6, the inclining block rate schedule on water customers. If I read this correctly, and I think this is probably an answer to one of my questions, the wastewater usage rates are flat without a declining or inclining block rate.
Correct.
And I would only voice my opinion that I continue to disagree with that. If you've got an inclining block scale for water, I believe you should have an inclining block scale for wastewater, because X% of the cost of either system is a fixed operational cost.
Sure.
If nobody used an ounce of water one day, 80% of that cost to pay employees to be there and run the system are still there. Same on the sewer side. That exponential cost to address that inclining scale of demand for water or distribution of sewer is there in that 20% variable within the system, and should be covered in that inclining scale for that heavier usage, because frankly what you get in those heavier usages often is a harsher process of treatment by those higher end type users. And
for the wastewater side, we basically require everyone to have domestic strength coming to us, and there's variables in the domestic strength. We do still surcharge for those that don't meet domestic strength. For BODs, COD,
Right.
for TS or
But that's
solids. For those
that's a pretty
industrials
high
that are in that is a high
bar.
level. Yeah, we hope that we don't see a big variable in our domestic strength coming from our residential customers. That's our hope. Right, Joe?
Well, I want to thank the staff. I've asked, I'm really not attacking what they did. I think when we work together,
Absolutely.
we come out with a better product, and I think we did here in this. And I think we have now tonight a better way of putting this out.
Yes, sir.
And that's not spin. It's just the fact that your rate's going to go up 9.4%, not 12%.
Not 12% total.
And people need to understand that. And the dollar amount, as Kristen and others have pointed out, the real, actual what it means, to a typical customer. But the response to the questions was good, and I appreciate it, and it was very useful.
Indeed. Thank you.
And we do appreciate the approval of the rate schedule, because it has felt for a couple of years like we're operating wastewater on a bit of a shoestring. It's been very, very tight, as Dave's pointed out in the charts and we've mentioned tonight. I want to thank Dave and Nelia. They've crunched a lot of numbers over the last 3 months or so on this and preparing these presentations you've received. We should mention that we'll have to use an ordinance to adopt these rates, so we'll have to introduce and adopt. We'll need to schedule a public hearing. We're required to do that on water and wastewater rates, to hold a public hearing. So we'll get that going here in January, February, because it is much appreciated as well that we can get these adopted here leading into the budget, because that helps Nancy and Joe, Mike, solidify their budgets. So thank you for that.
Once again, when we adopt it, I want to see 12, and I want to see 0, and I want to see increase in average bill or increase in something when we adopt it.
Yeah, we'll draft
I want it
something.
adopted that way, because we want to get credit for the 0 as well as the other.
Okay, we can have that written when we do the ordinance.
When we adopt it.
Yes, sir.
Because we need to adopt the 0s as much as we do the others.
Right.
Duly noted.
Yeah, well, it's really, and again, along those lines, I think just to show you though that the best laid plans, 1.5% was a pretty small estimate to estimate increase in revenues, and we didn't even make that.
We didn't make that.
Because that was another impact of the recession. So once again, the city has managed through, but we've got to cope with it. But it's been, despite conservative estimates, we didn't even hit that, and that's where I wanted to see what that amount added up to in dollars, and it's pretty significant. 1.47 on the rate charges and 1.3 on the benefits. So, best laid plans.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you, team.
Thank you. I'll put a memo back as a final memo with these numbers and changes in, and we'll get it out and circulated then.
Okay, I
All right,
appreciate
thank
that.
you. Yes, sir. Thank you all.
Thank you.
All right, next up is our City Center Business Retention and Expansion Survey results.
Good evening.
Good evening.
I want to go through the results of the survey that we administered at the end of last summer, and see if you had any questions about some of our findings. And you all have this in your packet. I assume it's been in there a couple times, I think. So, I'll start with a summary here, and we'll just kind of go through the questions. If you have any questions about the questions, please feel free to ask as I go along here. So basically, 214 businesses were emailed a link to an online survey. We use SurveyMonkey to collect the responses, and then 148 businesses were emailed a letter saying how they could access the online survey. So 362 total solicitations of businesses, and we got 74 individual responses, which is a 20% response rate. That's pretty good for an external survey like this. Three big kind of important findings that we felt came out of the survey were there's a large percentage of city center businesses that have either too much or too little space. So they're not in the right size shoe. And also nearly 60% of the respondents are not considering moving or selling their businesses in the next year. Finally, 41% of the respondents have experienced sales growth in the past year, which is, those last two are things that perceptions would lead you to believe otherwise. So we were happy to see those results. A survey like this gives us, it's a good snapshot of kind of what's going on, but also provides us opportunity to go back and see where we can help. Like, for instance, the businesses that were in office space that was either too big or too small, they have been contacted to see how, what exactly are their needs and how can we help? How can we help them find something that's going to fit? So that's another importance of doing surveys like this. So I'm going to go through the questions and ask me anything along the way. The majority of the respondents were from the professional category, the professional service category, like attorneys' offices, graphic design businesses, and other service businesses. Retail and restaurant was the second largest industry represented by the responses. Most businesses rent their space, and those that do not have a triple net lease, basically, so landlords cover one or more of the utility costs associated with the lease, which is maybe what we might expect. Office space size range from 250 square feet to more than 10,000 square feet, and there's a fairly even distribution. We've got some big offices downtown, and we also have some fairly small ones. But this is where we found out that 54% of the city center businesses have space that's either too big or too small. 39% of our city center businesses occupy between 1,000 and 3,000 square feet, which is pretty small, typical of a small business footprint, so no huge surprises there. Rental prices in the city are low. Almost 67% of all the renting businesses pay less than $10 per square foot.
Can I make a note there?
Yes.
My buddy and college roommate is now the owner of Forbes Candies in Virginia Beach and Outer Banks. And I took a snapshot of that chart right there, and he could not believe how cheap the per square foot rent is for downtown. So I just want everybody to know I'm actively recruiting him to come and put a big taffy puller in one of the windows downtown.
that'd be
have
great.
A destination candy store.
And that considering that, and then the landlord in that rental price, your landlord's probably paying at least one of your utility bills. I mean, so $10 a square foot is very low, which is an opportunity as much as it is a challenge.
But it's a challenge because, just to interject it, it won't support renovation or Class A office space. Those rents won't come close.
Sure.
That's right.
Either one, though. I want to emphasize it won't support quality new construction either.
Right.
It also means that it's very easy for a new business to open up in downtown Hagerstown.
Right.
So almost anybody can do it. City Center Hagerstown has some long-standing businesses also. 27% of our survey respondents have been in the city center for more than 26 years.
That's amazing.
That's a big deal. Yeah, that's some long legs. 57% of responding businesses are not interested in moving or selling in the next year, although 43% plan to or might move. It's two ways to look at that, obviously. That's a great opportunity for outreach directly from our office to the businesses.
Well, that could be directly related to the fact that they're in too big or too small of a space.
Exactly. And there was some crossover. The nice thing about using a SurveyMonkey or tool like that, you can cross-reference and see where your points hit and get in touch with them directly, which is what we're doing. Compared to the previous year, 41% of city center businesses have seen an increase in sales, while 25% have experienced flat sales growth, and only 14% have shown a decrease. I was surprised to see that 41% have seen an increase in sales in this economy, frankly. I thought that was decent, although there's always room to grow. And then 64% of our we have a strong women and minority-owned business presence in downtown Hagerstown. 64% of our downtown businesses responding to this survey are either owned by a minority or a woman.
Actually, I think it's the opposite.
Is it?
36% are owned by
I'm sorry,
women or
you're absolutely right.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely right. Thanks for pointing that out.
Still a high percentage.
It is a high percentage.
Yeah.
And this is also, the businesses that responded. This was a pleasant surprise. 91% of the responding businesses have a website, and then 72% have a business Facebook page. This is something that we've tried to push with our department. We've had a business Facebook page seminar that we held through on the small business during the entrepreneurial startup day, and so that's a strong Facebook presence for our downtown businesses. And you if you're involved with Facebook, you see it. And then Twitter and LinkedIn are utilized by 28 and 27% respectively of our downtown businesses. The makeup of our respondents is largely was largely small businesses. 55% of the respondents employ fewer than 2 full-time employees. So that's fairly indicative of a lot of our downtown businesses. 73% employ 1 or more part-time workers. Although, conversely, 27% employ no part-time workers. Almost 34% of the respondents see more than 100 customers per week, and 8% see more than 400 customers per week. It's probably, cross-referencing some of that, some of the restaurants were seeing over 400 per week. But when you see a business that sees 100 customers per week, that's law firms and businesses of that nature. That's foot traffic. It's all foot traffic. We want to see as much of that as possible. As you might guess, most of our city center businesses are mainly open during the weekdays, and 62% of them are not open past 5 o'clock at night. And you see that just in the foot traffic during the day versus in the evenings. 62% of our respondents provide parking subsidies for their employees. Of those, 92% fully provide parking and 8% partially subsidize the parking. Parking can be costly to an employer, and so that's as far as things that cost of doing business downtown. When you have 62% providing parking subsidies, that's a large cost to a business. And then at the end of the survey, there are a number of open-ended questions, and I can go through some of these, hit some of the highlights. But what some community events that have increased your sales or positively impacted your business, and how? Some of the obvious suspects were there. Blues Fest and August-Toberfest I had a number of people talked about that as being positive impacts on the business. Chamber events in general. Taste of the Arts came up a few times, and other just kind of foot traffic generators in general. There was a large participation from the downtown business in these events with Blues Fest and August-Toberfest. Some other businesses that we'd like to see that they would like to see located downtown is more professional offices, more unique retail, boutique shops, pharmacies, upscale nail salons. This was an interesting question. What products or services do you currently purchase for your business outside the city that you would consider buying locally if suppliers were available? Photo labs, photo services came up more than a couple times, and office supplies, and groceries in general. We having a grocery store downtown has been a goal. Moving on. We asked if there are any services that existing businesses downtown provide that other businesses would want to know about, that they could buy locally. And then what would you like to see improved or created downtown? And in general, a lot of people just said more foot traffic in general. And then First Friday type events was another thing, kind of a routine happening event that people can rely on, that's always happening, to come down and participate in. And then more arts and entertainment related businesses. We asked about some contributing factors to increase or decreased sales growth. Advertising and marketing has helped. Growth in the area and economy in general. Their web presence has helped. But lack of funds to afford a better location has hindered some people. And the evolving mix of downtown businesses has weakened some of their current sales.
Can you explain that? What does that mean?
I think that...
is that because now there's 20 restaurants, that's more competition, and so that's impacted their business?
That might be part of it, but I think it's also just that some of the types of businesses that are coming with the barriers to entry so low that so many different kinds of businesses are coming in that
I see.
I think that's affecting also. What specific challenges to growth does your business face? Parking came up, and various landlord issues were cited also, and we all know about some of those. What resources do you find valuable to your business that you think would help other businesses? SCORE came up a few times. That organization has been very helpful to a number of businesses, the Chamber of Commerce, networking events, Downtown Alliance. These are all good resources for businesses. What areas could you use additional training or knowledge to help you better operate your business? Management, marketing, technology, anything like that. Small business resources in general was kind of the theme. People would like to just have more advice and assistance with small business resources in general. And are there any resources you're interested in learning more about that you think you could use? And IT training, access to grants, grant writing, that's important. And how to get involved with planning downtown events. There is a desire for people to get more involved. They would like to get more involved on their own. And then there's some additional thoughts and comments, and I summarized some of those. But the one that really stuck out to me is we need to change how the regional community views our downtown, our own downtown. And there's some real positive comments in here, but it also highlights some of our challenges. So,
great.
Does anybody have any questions? I kind of flew through that.
You said next steps are continuing to reach out to these businesses to try to meet their needs.
Yep,
and
try to meet their needs, and this gives opportunity. We can also have other surveys that drill down specifically on some of these issues that come up. Sometimes I think that there are a lot of surveys that go through communities, and sometimes you look at them, and sometimes you delete them from your inbox. But there was a strong willingness to participate in this survey, so I think we ought to harness that and continue to gather as much information as we can.
Go ahead.
This is what you call a self-selected survey. It's not statistically a random sample. You know, how satisfied are you of the responses as a sample of the? Let's say you sent out 214 solicitations via the Survey Monkey, whatever. If you know roughly what category those were, how close a distribution were the 74 to the distribution of the 214?
Looking at each individual survey, and at the end of the survey, the businesses had the opportunity to identify themselves. Some of them did, some of them didn't. But it seemed as though it was a fairly good sample of our downtown businesses.
But they don't have to identify themselves. I mean, as a type, the percent of the 74 that were restaurants is the ballpark of the number of restaurants in the 214.
It did seem to correlate.
And professional services and some of the bigger ones. So that what I'm trying to get at is it a good sample?
We felt definitely that it was. In general, it's a good sampling of what we have down here. Okay. You know, I'm sure that there were some businesses that didn't respond. I know there were some businesses that didn't respond, but in general, the sampling was across all. Seemed to be fairly accurate.
Besides continuing to do outreach to these businesses, what other action items did you and other staff kind of take away from this?
It kind of highlights some of the key issues that we need to work on in general, and you know, we all look at there's some challenges and some opportunities, I think, with parking right now. There are, you know, some of the things that kept coming up was in the comments was people want to see a large catalyst project in the downtown, and so it helps to it helps to give credence to some of the things that we're already doing. Some of the, like the first third grant system program, which is that's some significant money available for big projects. So it uncovered, it justified some things and uncovered a couple other areas where we really need to start poking and prodding a little bit more. I think like parking. So.
For me, looking at the survey, I try to find things that don't appear to correspond. In terms of drilling down, a good example is, you know, of the respondents, 92% said they provide parking for their business, meaning their employees. But the number one item cited for what would be valuable to help your business was the issue of parking. So it's just odd to me to read that 92% of them have the ability to provide parking for their business, but the number one item cited for you know, at issue was you know, the availability of parking. And you can see it in 3 or 4 places within the survey where that specific item is identified as an area to say, hey, you know, I got enough parking for my employees, but that doesn't leave any for anybody else. It's sort of what it says. And then the other one is the 2 points of 60, and I thought this was a big factor, more than 60% of businesses are closed after 5 o'clock. But so many of the respondents cited the fact that what helps their business out the most is when we have events and activities, i.e. when folks are able to spend their free time in, in creating that foot traffic. So I found that odd to read, clearly what folks want is more events because the events are generating, more of that foot traffic, which, will then, I guess, in turn generate the ability for those after hours operations. And I was a little bit surprised to see folks list the School for the Arts coupled with the theater as sort of their third one next to the Blues Fest and August-Overfest, in terms of ranking that. And then I think the one that floored me the most, and I think this is the one that speaks to the mayor's comments and the one that speaks to why people are in the wrong sized places, is the cost per square foot.
Right.
Why go to this place of 200 square feet that I need when I'm, at a such reduced cost getting a place at, 500 to 1,000 square feet of space at that low price. That was the one I think that's probably surprised me the most, and probably the one that tons of folks that look for places to rent for small similar businesses go to areas well outside of the urban core because they think there's no way I'm going to pay $17 to $20 to $25 per square foot downtown. They're just assuming that when I can go to some small center, on the outskirts and pay probably double what that figure is. That to me was a bit.
It's interesting,
and
though.
Kristen, I think it's a great point because I don't think outside investors see that or understand that about values. And I've had people say, wow, I saw a house, I mean, this is residential, but across the street from City Park, and it really looked great, but I knew I couldn't afford $750,000. Well, they went to see the price, and it was a third of that, So it's I think the same thing applies in the city center.
Well, I think the landlord issue is part of that. When you have disengaged landlords who aren't willing to put the capital into fixing up their properties, you're pretty much putting it back on the small business entrepreneur to have to spend their risk capital on fixing up the property that they don't even own to get it ready for a business.
Happens routinely.
And I think that's one of the biggest challenges
In
that
my experience.
these business owners face.
Well, I say I don't mean to imply anything about my current landlord. The opposite's true of Mr. Bryan Center. But that has been my experience both personally and from talking to other renters downtown. Is the landlords are the much greater problem than anything else, as I see it.
So if we find some way of turning these properties over to investors who actually want to put money into them so that they can get the higher returns
we have,
per square foot.
We have one that I'd like to see if we can work with, who's major building downtown with the Grand. And we should try to make sure that we work together.
We have lunch being
Good.
scheduled coming up.
Good.
And I found it interesting that in your survey, while there was some mention, it clearly wasn't at the top of the list, which was subsidized housing. I mean, I thought it would be all over the survey comments, and it's just not. I mean, it's
Section 8 housing came up once.
Yeah, once as item number bullet point 7 under challenges to growth in your business. It wasn't. The survey wasn't as littered with responses about subsidized housing as I.
When really that gets to having the disposable income to buy the goods or services that are being offered in the stores and other businesses downtown.
Well, I think it also is reflective when you look at, if I'm correct, 60-some% of these were service, like
professional services.
Professional services, like attorneys who are not going to be really impacted by that kind of issue.
Right. The hours is an interesting point also, Kristen, about how you have more events in the evening, people will stay open later, or you stay open later to attract those crowds. I mean, it's almost
and clearly,
a
I think the event, and I agree, when I wrote the two down, I was like, this is like a chicken and the egg,
Yeah.
and clearly the events-oriented approach is the egg that that hatches the
Right.
additional activity. And it's good to see that respondents said, hey, how can we have more events? How can we get more involved and
I understand.
Spread those events out?
But the evening events downtown do have an impact, significant impact, especially on the restaurants. And indeed, they may keep many of the restaurants in business. So they're important, and they need to continue and grow.
I think the donut drop was a perfect example of collaboration between business owners downtown, the folks who are putting on the event, and the city in trying to, because you can have an event at night downtown, but if you don't coordinate with the businesses to make sure that they're going to be open, to have options for folks who are on the street, then you're not really doing anything.
That was well done. Yeah.
So.
Good. All right.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thanks for your time.
Oh, wait a minute, one question. Are you going to do this each year?
Yeah.
Is there going to be follow-on?
We probably should.
Try to compare and...
Yeah.
And like taking the temperature every year or something of the downtown business climate.
There'll be surveys in the meantime too.
Yeah, the planning department has a number of things that they have a trend because they're doing it every year. So use that as an example.
Sure.
Talk to Kathy.
She's here. Thank you very much.
Thanks. All right, we're going to update our on our loan portfolio. We have staff here to give us that update. This is another item that got bumped from our December snowy meeting date.
Good evening. Tonight we wanted to take an opportunity to present to the Mayor and Council a loan portfolio update. Stacy Pierre-Lewis, our Business and Community Development Finance Specialist, will be going over a brief PowerPoint presentation with you here in a moment. We previously updated the Mayor and Council on our loan portfolio, I believe, in the spring of 2013. Much of what you'll see tonight will be similar to that presentation. We had said we would come back to give the Mayor and Council an update on some of our delinquent loans and some of the new loans that we have actually processed over the year. And actually our revolving loan fund guidelines require a routine update to the Mayor and Council on our status of our loans and to inform the Mayor and Council of the new loans that we have processed. Mr. Catlett, the chair of our Hagerstown Loan Review Authority, he was unfortunately unable to be here tonight. But Stacy does work closely with the Hagerstown Loan Review Authority members, and she goes over the same thing that you'll see tonight with those members. So with that said, Stacy, if you want to go over the PowerPoint.
Okay. This just gives you a snapshot of our of the loan status of our total portfolio. The majority of it, of course, is our active loans. About 65% of our portfolio is active, followed by deferred loans, and then the smallest is our delinquent loan status. The next slide would give you the same information but divided by loan type. So 3/4 of our portfolio is pretty evenly dispersed by deferred, single-family, and public facility loans, CDBG multifamily, and business revolving loans. So the percentages that you see are actually based on dollar amounts in each of those loan types. But if you look in the key, I do have the number of each loan beside each category. So for example, there are 6 CDBG multifamily, 12 business revolving, and so on. The next slide gives you our key changes since the last update. We had 1 deferred single-family loan, which had a remaining balance of about $20,000, which was paid off all at once, giving us $20,000 of program income. We had about $113,000 of program income from principal and interest loan repayment since May 1st. We had 2 new business revolving loans, 1 new CDBG public facility loan, and we've also made some progress on our delinquent status loans. So those last 3 bullet points I'll go over in a little bit more detail over the next few slides. Our first new loan was Duvenage LLC. You're familiar with this one, I'm pretty sure. Through our business revolving loan fund, they received $100,000. This was a gap loan to assist them with the acquisition of Sharon Stairs, the business based out of Ohio. They were able to obtain a pretty significant bank loan, but they just needed some additional financing to complete the acquisition. This was made with a $100,000 grant to the city from the Maryland Economic Development Assistance Fund and matched with $50,000 from Upper Floors. The $100,000 was in the form of a business revolving loan, so each monthly repayment is going to continue to provide program income so that we can continue to make loans to other businesses without reduction of the fund balance. So that was definitely a positive transaction.
Yeah, the beauty of this is the state provided the capital.
Exactly.
When we retain the payments in our revolving fund, that's
right.
Wow.
It's perfect.
Yep.
Boosted our fund balance.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I remember that one.
Our next loan was Yumminess Bakery and Cafe in the amount of $18,500. This loan was to assist the new bakery in the city center on East Franklin Street. The owner had cash equity and was able to obtain an unsecured bank loan in the amount of $25,000 to assist. And they needed some additional funds just to pay for the other startup costs so that they could start their business. This loan actually closed the first week of December. And the last new loan we did was for Girls Inc. of Washington County. They received a $45,000 public facility loan to assist with a roof replacement for the facility at Washington Avenue. They already had a CDBG loan, which was originated in 2005 for about $281,000 to provide gap funding for the expansion of the facility. So we just combined the new loan with the original just to keep payments simple and manageable for the organization. So they didn't have to actually extend their term any longer. They had paid it down to about $200,000.
So this is in a regular payment status, this loan?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
I mean, the original, this is just rolled into.
Exactly.
But they are doing the regular payments.
Yes, they are.
Can we go back to Yummies a minute?
Sure.
Did Yummies purchase any of the equipment, startup equipment from the city of Hagerstown?
Yes, sir.
Did they purchase a machine that would allow them to sell ice cream?
That I'm not sure of. We would probably need to check with Eric Dyke on that and get back to you. I'm not familiar with the details of exactly what she
If they
purchased.
did, somebody needs to get back with them. That machine has turned out was completely defective and can't be repaired.
Okay.
I don't know how much they paid for it, but probably under those circumstances, too much.
Okay.
Now, I'm not absolutely certain they
I don't know why we would have an ice cream maker, but
I'm not absolutely certain they purchased that particular
I mean, I know we had an Italian bread oven that I know we sold, but that wasn't to them.
And we also had mixing bowls and the whole
Okay.
that.
Additional kitchen equipment.
Yeah,
Okay, so
right.
if you could check
But I
that
didn't
out.
know that.
We can look into that.
They made a
The restaurant
significantly
had-
large investment into that machine, and it turned out that it's just worthless.
Appreciate you following up. on
Don't we
this.
have a leftover pizza oven they could use?
That's gone.
That's gone.
We sold that too.
Darn.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. And to touch on our delinquent loans, we've got 3 business revolving loans which are delinquent. As we reported with the last update, the Spirit of the Lotus Tea Company. This loan we're unlikely to collect on, and it's soon going to be shifted to an inactive status. VJS Inc. or Rocky's Pizza, also unlikely to collect. There's insufficient collateral value in order to recover this, and it will soon also be shifted to inactive status.
So that one, it looks like that one's a total of the 104,000 roughly. I'm assuming where it's a separate 17,000 equipment loan was satisfied, that was satisfied through sale of equipment?
Right, exactly.
Okay.
And Clyde Deming, or 28 South Potomac Street LLC, they are attempting to catch up and have recently begun making payments again. Payment hadn't been made on this loan since December of 2011, but there were some significant payments made in November and December of 13.
Let me ask you a question about the first one. It's very unlikely that that loan will ever be paid back under any circumstances. When it's an inactive status, does that mean it's essentially written off? Do you spend time following it?
We do monitor them from time to time. It's not forgiven. It's basically written off our current books.
Yeah.
But We do not forgive any of the prior collateral, security, or whatever loan documents secured the loans. So it still remains an existing debt
So if some
to
sort
us.
of an unusual opportunity comes along, you
Correct.
can collect, but you're not spending any money or time.
Yeah.
If we find out the guy wins the lottery,
Yeah.
we'll be sure to
We'll
collect.
revisit those from time to
Right.
time with the city attorney.
Well, the
and-
same thing's true with the second
You
one as
mentioned collateral. Is there some collateral, even if it's tied up in these?
I think we do have most of these loans. I don't know if there's any collateral available for the two that we're shifting to inactive.
Well, the trouble, collateral is often tied up with other claims. That's,
I believe that there was property with Rocky's Pizza, but there's not. We referred it to our attorney, the city attorney, and there's not enough value.
There's no equity. There are loans ahead of our loan that
Right.
exceed the value.
Well, that's what I'm
of
talking
the-
about, other claims.
Yeah. At this point, you would be wasting money to pursue.
Yeah.
Unless the situation would change.
And that's why we don't close it.
Correct.
And we also have 3 delinquent CDBG loans. One of them is a single-family loan. I'm sorry, did you have a question?
Well, we kind of went through number 3
Oh,
quickly.
okay.
I mean, I understand you're saying they haven't made a payment since December 2011. They made payments in November and December. I guess maybe I would like to figure out what you mean by catching up. In other words, if somebody paid you $500 in November and $500 in December, and they're behind $50,000, to me that's not catching up.
This is one of the loans where we would have been in a similar situation to the Rocky's Pizza loan. I think our recourse would be to potentially look at foreclosure, but once again, it's a matter of not having any collateral available, and we'd be likely
some number in line.
Yeah, and we're better off at least to try to continue to collect as much money as we can and work with the owner to push, or the loan recipient to push for payments.
Has the owner indicated, Christian raises a really good point about it. Has the owner indicated that he's going to make regular payments from here on?
It's going to try to, and we have seen some positive steps here in November, December.
Yeah. Thank you.
Our delinquent CDBG loans, we have one single-family loan. They are actually in constant communication with staff to, again, try to catch up a little. They made a payment of $3,000 in August to reduce their past due balance significantly. And like I said, they are reaching out to us and letting us know when they're able to make payments and paying us as much as possible.
I would assume that the parameters in which these loans under CDBG are constructed differently than our level of involvement in the revolving loan fund process. In other words, I would assume there's other steps and processes to go through in the event collection has to occur, and simply
Right.
because it's a federal versus a city funding.
Exactly.
And we typically work closely with Mr. Nair on all of these as well.
Okay.
Just a question that applies to all of these. I realize some have, do all of these have interest, or some of them are sort of grants without interest? And if they do, is that accruing on the balance, or are we just trying to collect the original capital?
It would be the original capital. There wouldn't be any, that I'm aware of, any grants involved with those CDBG loans.
So this is the original capital, and there's no opportunity cost, there's no interest being charged.
Well, actually, most of the CDBG loans we will charge interest. I apologize if I misunderstood, but this would be the current balance of interest, principal, and
Okay, that's what
late
I'm getting
fees.
at.
Yeah.
So you could make a payment but still not reduce the capital depending on what the interest is.
Yes.
Like the Deming loan, I think it depends what the update is, but that might take care of it.
Right.
Not reduces capital. Okay.
Let's see, Demcor LLC, again, recently making payments and made some significant payments in both November and December of 2013. The Elks Lodge, Pride of Hagerstown, they are in communication with staff, and we've begun the loan modification process with that one as well. So we have 3 delinquent CDBG loans, 3 delinquent business revolving loans, and so out of those 6, we are making some positive progress on 4 of them. So it's looking a little better there. Our default process currently is, as I have listed there, if a loan is determined to be in default, the matter will be conveyed to the city attorney for disposition. Basically, the steps that we take in order to get there is that, of course, continually monitoring the loan statuses to make sure that we are aware. The steps also include both written and phone contact with the client to make sure they're aware of their outstanding balance, any past due balance, inform them of next steps in the recovery process, and discuss any payment options if applicable. There is potential reporting of delinquency to the credit bureau, and of course also referral to the city attorney. Yes.
Maybe this is more a question than a statement.
Yes, sir.
As it applies to the process you've outlined and the awareness that some of the loans are either delinquent or were in a delinquent status for some period of time. Now, I'm certainly not familiar with all of the steps that we as a body are required to go through or staff is required to go through to secure that outstanding debt, but I don't know how else to say this except just to say it, but it is important, at least for me as a member of the body, that we understand that somebody hasn't made a payment since December 2011. I'm not comfortable with that surprise element, somebody stopping me and saying, hey, by the way, did you know this loan you made is $100,000 past due and the city hasn't seen a payment on it in 18 months, because I don't know how to readily respond to that. So my preference, and the reason of bringing up these items, is to be able to say, yes, we're aware of it. Here is where it's at within the process, and here is the manner in which we are appropriately addressing it.
Right. Within payments are due by the 15th of the month, and so if the 15th passes and we haven't received payment, that's when we initially contact them to make sure that they are aware. It could be an oversight. And we've got several chances through written contact and also phone calls just to kind of maintain in contact with them. So they're typically aware of where they are before 2 years passes.
Do you get the perception that because it's the city loaning them the money, they don't really take it as seriously as if it was a bank loan, where they wouldn't hesitate to report you to the credit bureaus?
I think sometimes also it depends on the situation. Sometimes, I don't want to say we're a lender of last resort, but we tend to have a lot of loans that we're in second or third position. So sometimes our leverage may not be as good if you
we
were
don't
a
really
bank
have
with,
any teeth.
Yeah.
It is risky. I mean, that's the whole, like you said, the reason they come to us.
To lend any funds, but I think overall, for the most part, our delinquency amount is a small percentage overall.
Well, this is good work.
Thank you.
Okay.
In our loan management system, we've made some changes here. We've purchased Lending Pro software, which provides a low-cost solution to help us service and track our loans a little better. Staff, DCD staff, finance, and IT work together to try to streamline those processes and integrate Lending Pro with what we already have in existing Munis. All of our loan data and transactions have now been migrated over to Lending Pro, so we've started to implement the new system. So loan origination and maintenance are now more streamlined and can allow us to provide a lot better customer service and also track the delinquent loans and the active loans and know exactly where we are with those. And that's all. Anyone else have any questions?
No. Thank you for this presentation.
Thank you.
Just more like just a quick comment. A portfolio of 3.1 million, delinquent 323. I think considering the risk we just we just talked about, I think compared to what you hear from some other municipalities, we're doing well. But we need to be careful that green doesn't obviously get bigger. Especially with the economy the way it's been.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Also, thank you for your efforts from the last update to this update. There's been positive success in the middle of a terrible recession. So thank you for your continuing efforts.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would like to suggest that we get, at least annual reports on.
Well, I think they said that's required as part of what they do with those. So, we've got one of these presentations last year.
Yes.
All right.
I think it was approximately April.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, next we have an update on the noise ordinance. I think we actually did introduce this and at the last regular session, but I know there were some concerns, some things we wanted to take a look at. So
Yes, this is back to provide the body an opportunity to discuss further the noise ordinance, given that there might be some concerns, some concerns that were voiced during the night that we introduced the ordinance.
I certainly voiced them, Mayor. Our city clerk, historically, at least from when I've been here, has been a very independent position in the city. To start having the city clerk be responsible for determining issues that I think are appropriately to be determined by elected officials, I think puts the city clerk in a position that he or she should not be put in. I think that's our responsibility, that if somebody thinks, whether it's a noise ordinance or it's any other ordinance, if this city passes a law and somebody thinks that they should have a variance from that law, I don't think that decision should be made by an individual staff member. I don't think that makes sense, and I don't think it's fair to that individual staff member who is going to get the grief one way or the other. We're elected to take that heat, and I think that's where the variance should come from. I don't know how anybody else.
Is there any particular reason why the city clerk was?
If I could explain, originally we were talking about a permit, and some of the groups that were criticizing this, we had originally had a provision in that you apply for a permit 30 days in advance, and they said, well, that's a burden on free speech. We ought to be able to get one in 5 or 10 days. So then we reduced the time period, I think, to 5 or 10 days, and we said, well, City Council may not be able to deal with that in that short a window, so that's why we went to the city clerk rather than...
A permit for what?
Well, originally, the section that is now a variance was a permit section, a permit to have any...
Can you give some examples, Bill, of what we're talking about in terms of what might trigger a request for a variance? Or Kathy, or...
I mean...
Someone wanted to have a party with music that would exceed the decimal. That would need to get a variance.
So they need to come to City Council. That's a simple solution. And if they decide that they want to have a variance 5 days before their event, guess what? They're probably not going to get it.
Poor planning.
But how? It seems to me that the temporary ones. I mean, are these all temporary? Are there any permanent ones to be? It seems to me there's a difference between somebody looking for a permanent variance or somebody just looking for something for a weekend or one day or one night. And why can't code enforcement handle this instead of the city clerk or somebody who's more used to dealing with these types of situations?
How do we allow a staff member to essentially tell somebody they're not subject to the law? I just don't understand how you pass a law saying this is the law about noise. And if you have a situation which creates a great hardship and it's felt that your need and that hardship outweighs this ordinance, you can get a variance. I think those are issues that need to be brought to the elected body.
Somebody having a party needs to come to the elected body?
Yeah, if they're going to have a party that exceeds the noise.
We do that for alcohol permits.
If it exceeds the noise in here, yeah. Because I would assume if your neighbor wants to have a party, I mean, somebody's going to take the grief for saying that's fine at 2 in the morning, you can have loud music. And it should be the broad shoulders of us, not a staff member.
Well, I agree it shouldn't be the city clerk. I'm not so sure that some of these are administrative in nature.
An alternative would be to have, if you're not comfortable with having a city staff member, as a city staff member, have it go straight to the appeal body that we put into this section.
Let me give the best example I can give in the whole world, okay? The Hagerstown Sons with fireworks. Under here, they go to whoever in the city and say, geez, you know, we need 27 dates for fireworks or we're not going to make money. And they convince a staff member that that's okay. And then the world comes to the city council saying, but how did you let this happen? And we say, well, we didn't have anything to do with it.
But see, I see a qualitative and quantitative difference between that and a one-time small event. And I'm not sure how to define the cutting line.
How do you cut that line?
Well,
how do you make that determination?
I don't have an issue, I mean, unless it creates some kind of administrative barrier to having it put on our agenda, just like we do for alcohol, the permits, or even we do approve the fireworks schedule for the Suns.
We do,
so.
absolutely, and that's the next issue here.
So can we approve them in work session?
Sure.
We can?
We can
call us without calling a special session?
We can.
I mean, you're saying we're approving variances to a law. Can we do it just informally by show of hands? I'm not sure we can.
Well, I would think if a staff member could do it without an official meeting or any public meeting at all, that a city council could do it in a public meeting on an agenda item, especially if we put into the statute that such variances may be granted in emergency situations or work sessions. And if not, you call a special session. I mean, it's pretty simple. And I have serious doubts of how many people are going to be making requests to have waivers of noise ordinances for small parties. I mean, we've been around for a long time. We haven't seen complaints along that. The police do, and they come out and they handle it, because there's two different issues here, and let's be straight on that. One is a city noise ordinance. The other is disturbing the peace, okay? So you can tell somebody that they're not subject to the city noise ordinance for their small party and then get arrested for disturbing the peace if they're disturbing the peace, even if they're not. So it seems to me that my own opinion is it should come to city council. If others disagree, that's fine.
What do any other people disagree with that?
No, I think that's where it should be. The only thing that I see that could possibly happen is that if anybody's really paying attention, we may be more likely to, if it doesn't come to council, see more and more of parties being out there.
I think the only concern, I guess, would be if someone wants to say, well, you're, by making me wait until the next city council meeting. We meet, 50 times a year probably, and if that's too much of a burden, squashing their free speech, I'd be glad as the mayor to consider it. I have broad shoulders. I can take the heat.
Let them sue us. I don't understand.
Emergency situation.
I don't understand what free speech issues would be involved here. There's no free speech issues involved here. The issue here is a noise ordinance.
It's noise.
We're passing a noise ordinance to pass constitutional muster without providing for any variances. Okay, so would you agree with me? So this ordinance, we could put in there, you can't get a variance. And we have not constitutionally violated anybody's free speech.
So
we have not violated anybody's free speech.
No, I just want to ask the city attorney a question. So somebody sues us. What record do we need of our action to counter that lawsuit?
Well,
one of those groups decides to sue us, that the council made a decision, but it was a show of hands, it wasn't clear, there wasn't a call for a roll call. I'm just doing a hypothetical here. On a variance, yeah.
Well, I think
what do we need? What do we need is my question, to make it stick if we get sued?
Well, I think first of all, the person would fill out an application and would give you, some facts that would become part of the record, and then, but Yeah, I guess
I'm getting to the record of our action that the judge would, or whoever is dealing with their lawsuit.
There's minutes.
Need to state minutes. I guess
that
minutes
adequate?
would work. Minutes would
on
be
YouTube.
adequate, I believe.
And what board is this being appealed to?
Why?
And why would it go to the Board of Technical Appeals?
Well, we did that.
It was the board for chapter, it was the crime-free or?
Well, I would imagine if we replace the
Not
city
the
clerk with the
technical
city
appeal.
council, there is no appeal.
There wouldn't be a
Right.
need.
Then the
for it.
appeal would go to the appeal would go to circuit court, and the issue on any appeal to the circuit court from this would be simply, did we do something arbitrary without any
Right.
basis in fact at all?
Well,
That's
I
all.
mean, I have no problem with taking up.
And I can't
Councilmember
imagine that
Metzger's
we're,
suggestion.
I mean, the best example I can give is the fireworks. And I can't imagine that, first of all, I wouldn't be worried about getting sued over it. I don't know where
I mean, I think our
But the-
agenda is flexible enough on a weekly basis that we could entertain a
The
variance. to
fireworks
this.
we've approved by the resolution process.
I'm not in favor of a variance in general.
Well, that becomes a whole different issue.
When I just read this thing and go, okay, under the exemption section, it clearly outlines reasonable things in which the city appropriate staff will determine exemption to occur, which is most likely going to be the police officer when he's called to a scene, and it's either going to be an exemption under this ordinance or it's going to be something that constitutes disturbing the peace, which is up to our officers and the courts to hash
Kristen,
out.
My only concern, my concern.
Everything else we do, parades, fireworks, all that, we already do through agreements.
No, that comes to point number two. I see exceptions and variances. I wouldn't have exceptions. I would have variances. I would not have section 155-5 in there at all. Exemptions mean they're exempt from this statute, doesn't it?
Which I think that they should be.
So you think the Sun should be able to have fireworks every night of the week?
No, if you read, it says parades, firework displays, festivals, and other special events subject to the terms of approval or permits by the city of
And
Hagerstown.
the only thing that I know of that permitted by the city of Hagerstown for fireworks is through the fire marshal. The only reason people come to us for approval of fireworks is because we have a noise ordinance.
But we also write that into the section associated with our agreement with Suns.
But that's, I'm using the Suns. What about every Tom, Dick, and Harry that may decide on...
Cancun Cantina is going to put off fireworks.
They want to do fireworks displays and they get approval of the fire marshal. That, to me, is the only thing they need approval
And I
of
guess
here.
as a council member, I'm just not interested in assuming that role, which I feel is better fitted to the officer or individual on behalf of the city that responds to the scene at the time of the incident occurring. In other words, I don't see where somebody will come in and say, you know what, I'm going to have a party at my house. It's going to be 500 people
I
this
agree
weekend.
with you.
I can't
don't
guess
think
that
that's
any more than
what
I can
happened,
guess
but
Barefoot Bernie's having a fireworks display. If it's disturbing the peace, it doesn't matter whether we sat in this room 3 weeks prior or not, they're going to get a call and they're going to have to hash out how something occurred in some process through some approval at that moment when you're getting 50 calls from the neighborhood saying, hey, I've got a group with a 20-foot bonfire.
At that point, the proprietor pulls out something that says, well, the city council approved this exemption.
I'm not interested in doing that.
From 9 to 11, and,
So really, the exemption is a variance. I mean, that's basically what you're saying.
That's how I feel.
Lou,
If
right?
something breaks,
you could take
emergency
that out,
operation
the
work
exemptions,
required.
because they would have to get a variance, basically.
That's exactly how I feel about it. I think that to exempt festivals, fireworks displays, and special events from this ordinance,
Because that would be part of their process for
that'd be
applying
part
for
of their
whatever.
process applying for all
But
this
it doesn't.
I
mean, it says subject to the terms of approval of permits by the city of
But
Hagerstown.
you can exceed the noise volume set up in here if, right now it says the city of Hagerstown approves it. We could put it back to the existing language, which is subject to the terms of approval or permits by, or subject, if approved in advance by the mayor and city council.
However you want to do it, whether it's a variance or whatever, the same way it was before. I mean, that's all. It seems to me that what you're saying is if you want to have something like a festival or something that is going to create noise above the decibel levels that we have allowed,
Right, you're gonna blast
you need
the
to
Zumba
get
music
you
in the
need to
park or
get
whatever.
permission from the city council before you do it. Just the best example in the world is the Hagerstown Suns and Fireworks.
Or the
Come to the
Women's
city
Parade.
council and say you want to do that. Kristen, I totally agree with you. We've never had people come in to get variances for parties, and nor, quite candidly, do I believe we would give them one. Unless
I
it
don't
was
think they
a,
would want to give the police a tip that they're having
you
a
know,
party.
well,
at their house.
where you get that, but it comes in festivals. You have block parties that
Right.
the neighborhood first put on, and they may want to have a band there that would exceed, and then you have a block party. You have something that comes to city council. The same people, they're going to come. They're going to want to close the street down. They're going to want other services,
Right.
and part of that whole process is a variance from the noise ordinance. It's very simple.
Now I hear what you're saying.
So if we rephrase or work on the language on M under 155.5 to make it clear that it's coming to mayor and council.
If
I
approved,
think
Do you
I,
just want M eliminated, or
I
do you
think we
want
should
all
just eliminate
exemptions?
I would eliminate section 155.5 exemptions. I don't know why we would have exemptions.
I'm not
We
in
have
favor of that.
variances.
Well, but I mean, in that exemption, we have
there's a
now,
whole
There's an
like
emergency.
blue
If there's an
space.
emergency
Excuse
work
me.
for a broken water line, and they got to run 7 generators to
No,
fix it.
no,
at 1 in the
okay,
morning.
excuse me. I'm sorry. No, I would not
Section
get rid
M.
of the whole 155.5. Yes, I apologize. I would
But
get
you
rid
would
of that.
eliminate
I would
letter M.
eliminate M. That is
Just M.
correct.
Eliminate M.
And I apologize for that. That is correct.
So just have that be part of the variance process, the M. Instead of spelling it out
I
as
want to
an
make sure I'm
exempt.
clear on what we're saying on M, yeah.
M right now says parades, exempt or parades, firework displays, festivals, and other special events subject to the terms or approval of, or permits by the city of Hagerstown. One option is to say if approved in advance by the mayor and council. The other option is to take it out entirely and they just have to use the variance process, which apparently would now go to the mayor and council. I didn't hear three.
Well, wouldn't it be clear if, since we have an established practice with the fireworks displays, where
And the
clearly,
parades.
you know, staff brings a schedule to mayor and council. And kind of
Very
like the
good
mayor's saying,
resolution, right?
Right.
well, like, I don't know if we do a resolution, I think
we
it's
do.
a motion.
Yeah,
But
a motion.
same
That's-
with when
that's
we
a
bring,
resolution to me.
when we bring you a special event that involves alcohol.
Yes.
You know we're going to bring those to mayor and council.
Absolutely.
So if we had some clear language in here, whether it's under exemption, I just think it needs to be clear that
How
we're
so?
bringing those events to mayor and council.
Right, and that would be
People
through
can
the
get an
variance.
exemption for a parade or a festival, but they need to come to staff, submit an application, staff gets it to mayor and council.
Right now, it is in the exemption section, and it comes to the mayor and council.
And I believe the variance is more appropriate, and I believe, quite candidly, L should not be in there under exemptions either, because when we're giving a variance, we're not exempting them from the statute. We're giving them the right to do what they're doing, and maybe
In that
I'm just...
particular place and time.
Yeah, maybe I'm just cutting words too much, but I don't think we're exempting them. I think the stat versus these other folks who don't have to come to us for anything under the exemptions.
So are we getting rid of variances or exemptions?
Yeah,
L
you're
and
just
M?
getting rid of M, L and M. Just L and M under exemption.
And then have the variances go to the mayor and council.
That's how I would do it.
So variances to mayor and council, and we can rephrase that. When you say get rid of L and M, though, aren't we still gonna have that in there somehow?
Well,
for-
L and M would fall under a variance.
But what this is saying that is if you get the variance under L, then you don't need to worry about the sound, the decibel issues.
Right, if you get, and you know, I don't know, and I leave it up to staff, because I hear what you're saying, Bruce, and when I see variance, there you have to weigh hardships to the applicant, the community, of not granting. You know, you may want to authorize city council to grant variances for parades, fireworks displays, festivals, blah, 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 under a simple finding that it's in the best interest of the community, without having to show a hardship for the applicant. Here, because you know, that
You
may...
think of a school or a church maybe having some kind of outdoor picnic or
Right,
festival,
and
and they have music or a cakewalk with music or something.
Exactly, and
There
so,
are events like that that can come up that.
and maybe what you want to do is maybe you want to keep M where it is, but change the language instead of saying subject to the terms or approval or permits by the city. See, it may be fine, it's just not clear to me what approval or permits we're giving.
And that's where I'm wondering if in M, we say approval to mayor and council.
That may solve the whole problem.
Because that helps staff. I think for staff too, 5 years from now when we're saying, do we need to bring this to council or not?
That may solve
Those
the
are
problem.
the kind of events that I think should come to council.
Yeah, my big concerns under M is fireworks with the thought that someone would come to us and say, subject to the terms of approval or permits. It doesn't say and permits, it says or permits. I got a permit from the fire marshal. There are no other permits or approval required. If you change the word or to and, it may solve all the problems in the world. Subject terms of approval.
Approval by the mayor and council.
By the mayor and council. And permits by the city of Hagerstown.
Subject to the permits by the city and the approval of the mayor and council.
There you have everything solved, and that's all you have to do is add those words to M, and you don't have to.
And then change the language in 155-6 to reflect mayor and council instead of the city clerk.
Yes, and that would.
Appeals would also be different.
That's good.
And that would work perfectly. You have very minor changes that solve everything.
And honestly, this is not probably going to be something that comes before us.
No, fireworks will.
Right.
Fireworks might, a parade could, or something like that. But we usually are bringing those to you anyway, I think.
Right. That's exactly right. That would solve all the problems.
Does that work for you guys, Kathy?
That works. Once again, I just want to emphasize that right now, the way I see it, most of these things we approve by what I call a resolution, call a motion, in what I call the legislative session at the end of the year. These permits we're talking about, these variances, excuse me, we're talking about approving in work sessions, so there's a reasonable turnaround. I think, again, if we're sued on that, we better have a clear record, who voted for what and how it was done.
I don't have a problem with having special session to do it.
Yeah,
that's not a problem. My guess is we're not going to need a special session to do it, because my guess is the only time we're going to have these kinds of applications will be ample time to have it done in a regular session. If there's some type of emergency that comes up,
you can have a special session.
Then we have a special session and we approve it. That's simple. I mean, I think we're...
Penny, you're okay with this? Don's okay?
Yeah,
Kristen?
I think we need to move on.
I agree.
Marty?
Well, we can try it.
Thank you
Okay,
for
we'll make
your
those changes, have
indulgence.
it on for adoption at the end of the month?
I would imagine we'd have to, since we introduced the ordinance as it exists now, do we have to change? If we're making changes?
No, we can make changes.
No, we just make the amendment. Make the amendments, pass it as amended.
Gotcha.
Between introduction and approval. That's what we have the work sessions for. Yeah.
Gotcha.
It's, I would say.
All right. Last but certainly not least,
Yeah.
we are again considering the housing and neighborhoods legislation, the crime-free and excessive use of services and rental facilities.
Mr. Mayor, maybe I can start this. I have a whole number of provisions. And let me begin by saying a lot of times since I've been on the council, there have been issues that come up to the council that certain members oppose vehemently. And in the discussions, they constantly try to change the ordinance, always knowing that they're going to vote against it no matter what changes take place. It's my intention to be voting for this ordinance, not against it. And I want to say that at the outset, so that I don't want anybody to think that I'm trying to make changes to an ordinance that I ultimately won't support. That's not true. But my problem began, it's my fault. I truly respect staff, and 99% of the time just do a knee jerk of, yeah, this is great, staff's recommending I go along with it. I had occasion to really think about this and listen to some folks. These are a number of my concerns. One, I think we're as duplicitous as we could ever be. We have a rental registration law, which, as I understand it, we have a city and we have a set of landlords out there, and every landlord has to register with this city. And so when I see that we're creating another bureaucracy which makes the exact same people get a license, it seems to me that this licensing thing is unnecessary, that it can fall under the rental registration law, that if they violate this, it would be equivalent to violating the registration law. I just don't see the necessity for two separate registrations for the same people for essentially the same thing. That's one.
I just want to be clear. You don't mean we're being duplicitous. You mean we're being duplicative.
Duplicative.
Okay.
Thank you.
Because I don't think anyone here is
I
being
appreciate
duplicitous.
that. I appreciate that. You're absolutely correct, and I used the wrong word. Two, we are having everyone take this educational program, which I think is probably one of the key components of this. I see a couple key components, and I will mention them. This is one of them. And I know that what we're trying to achieve. And it seems to me that about the only onus that we're putting on landlords when we get through, at least what I think, that we're putting on them essentially really is a 1 to 2 hour educational program if everything else goes all right. It also seems to me that we've indicated that we want to have people do this every 2 years. My thoughts are that if we have landlords that go through this process and go through this education, and in 2 years there hasn't been one single incident, that they should not be required to actually have to physically attend that next educational session. That does not mean that we should not make available to them either DVD of the educational session or put it on Channel 6 and ask them, and if things go the way I hope they go with this program, people will want to turn on Channel 6 or get the DVD because they will find, oh, this isn't bad, this works. And again, that would be for people who have had no issues at all for the 2 years. Those were two of my points. Bruce, I apologize. I'm really bad over the holidays of responding to your request. One of the questions I had, and is we already have the law. That's this thing that's sort of driving me crazy. Is we're getting all this kickback from people because we're enacting something that we're really not changing much. And I am curious to know, we have the nuisance law in effect, and what's been the results? What percentage of landlords have had 3 nuisance complaints, have had 5 nuisance complaints, have had 10 nuisance complaints? Because we're apparently trying to fix something, and I candidly think that I would like to know what it is we're trying to fix. We put it initially at 10 complaints. Has anybody been fined? So I'd like to see those statistics of where we're at with them, because again, we already have built in here, $100 for a first offense, $250 for a second offense, and $500 for a third offense. And this is a law that's been on the books forever and a day. That's not a new law. That's already the law as I understand it. Then my last thing in reading over this, and sometimes, and Chief, I appreciate this. Believe me, I do. And sometimes I just see different than other people do. Tenant, any members of the tenant's household or a guest of the other person's affiliate with any member of the tenant's household should not engage in criminal activity at or near said premises. Well, I don't know about you all. I know what criminal activity means. And I sure wouldn't want a rapist using his house or a robber. And then we define criminal activity, and all we talk about is drugs. And then at the end and say, and any other acts defined in the Maryland Code. I got a client right now who is facing a maximum of $100 fine because he has a citation for marijuana possession on a medical marijuana case. And I completely support the first sentence here, but I think the war on drugs failed long ago. And I think a combination of essentially saying to people, if you catch somebody, if somebody's caught in their apartment with paraphernalia, which carries a maximum penalty of $500, and they don't get convicted of it, that's a material breach and you should throw them out. And I know the law doesn't say they should be thrown out or have to be thrown out, but I personally, I would take out, shall not engage in criminal activity at or near said premises, and criminal activity is defined in the Maryland Criminal Law Code, annotated. It's from time to time amended, because that's the criminal activity that I'm talking about. I am not going to sit here and emphasize and try to emphasize that what we're really trying to do is take people who may have drug problems, who may have disease issues, and say not only are we going to prosecute them, but we want to make sure that they can't live here. I won't be a party to that. I will be a party to shall not engage in criminal activity at or near the premises. And those were my issues. Those were my issues. I think I'm not sure that I understand the penalty provision that we have in here, in so much as we already have a penalty provision for the excessive use of services. And candidly, excessive use of services is much more interesting to me. I may feel differently than other people do.
In terms of nuisance abatement, you mean?
Yeah,
So you're okay with lowering the threshold for those?
Well, I think I am. I think I am, but I would like to hear what kind of statistics we have on the nuisance issues.
How many times we've been able to use that ordinance?
How many times we've had to use that ordinance? Not been able to, but have had to. And you know, where we go from 10 to 3, what the theory is. And statistically, I think before we discuss that, I would like to see those statistics if we could. I again reiterate, I support the ordinance. And I hopefully am going to be voting for it. But those are my issues. And the two big ones were the one's a soapbox, the third issue. The two big issues I have are the two different, the licensing along with the registration, and exempting folks who don't have any problems from the second requirement to go to education. And the last thing I might add, which is not so much involved with changing anything. You know, I had some contact with the Landlords Association. Some of the folks that I have a good deal of respect for, and I will be quite blunt with you, some of the folks I have no respect for whatsoever. Without mentioning the landlord's name, I was associated probably close to 30 years ago with a case right here down on East Washington Street, where I represented a family that had an infant electrocuted to death because that infant touched a screen in their window. And when that landlord was contacted and told what happened and he needed to get down there and get these people some housing, his answer was he had other things to do. And that particular landlord is very high up in the Landlords Association. So I don't want anybody to think when I say that I have respect for a lot of these folks and I have a lot of no respect for some of them, that's accurate. But I've spoken to some that I do have respect for, and I would urge us to start dealing with some of these people like Roger Fairborn, who's indicated to me, he said, you know, Lou, one of the educational aspects here is to teach landlords how to do background checks. And he said, you know, every single member of our association, $11 and we do a background check. He says, we can probably help teach you guys how to get it done. So I'm thinking that maybe we also need to reach out to at least the association, the responsible people there, and say, can we work together to do this the right way? So that instead of you guys fighting us, you're supporting us. And instead of us teaching you, why don't we both jointly teach together? I heard a little bit, to put an analogy, I heard a little bit, it sounded like maybe a lawyer saying, so you're gonna have the police come teach me the law, eh? And there are a lot of lawyers who would need that because they don't do criminal law. And there are a lot of landlords that need that.
Certainly need it.
Yeah, no, seriously.
And
but
I think the bottom line is self-regulation isn't working.
No,
the Landlords
no.
Association, all those folks, if self-regulation worked and those folks had members within their ranks that were delinquent and have negative impacts on the neighborhood, we wouldn't be here.
Mayor, I couldn't agree with you more. And that's why I repeat where I started. It is my intention to vote for this ordinance. And I don't think what I'm suggesting waters this ordinance down. I could be wrong about that, but it's not my intention to do that. And I'm just one speaking about it. But the two big concerns, to repeat them, are the dual registration. I think we could get the registration under the rental registration that we already have. Maybe I'm wrong. And the second thing I think we can all agree with is those landlords that have no issues for a period of 2 years should not have to come back and physically be present for the educational session.
They have to take an initial.
Oh, I have to take the initial one, absolutely.
Well, I agree with much of what Councilmember Metzner says. I think I brought up originally the problem of having these sort of dual systems, and can't we consolidate it somehow? That was one of my initial concerns. So I still share that. And I do think it's reasonable if somebody has a good track record, and I think it's reasonable to see the statistics of, what we're addressing if they're available, and it helps us make our point. I do think that there's a lot of misunderstanding of this ordinance out there and a lot of exaggeration about it, and I think we should all work to try to counter that, so I'm not against this ordinance either. I think those are things we need to look at.
Well, and just to be clear, that exaggeration has certainly not been perpetuated by this body.
No, I'm not. I'm not saying that at all.
I know. I'm just trying to make that abundantly clear. And while I certainly understand there is a majority at the table interested in these alternative steps, in at least for me, for the sake of compromise and getting something accomplished, I don't have, and I think one of the email correspondence I had with Mr. Kraft, we had a similar discussion about you've got sort of 3 different ordinances attempting to accomplish, the same set of criteria, which is, securing the conditions of the neighborhood, the folks that live there, that rent there, that own homes there, and the neighborhood as a whole, and improving the conditions of communication with the property owners. So I would leave the first suggestion by alluded to folks smarter than myself to determine whether or not what we have and the goals we're trying to meet can be constructed in some more efficient document where we're almost sort of amending an existing ordinance or consolidating some ordinances with what we're attempting to accomplish here. I don't have a problem with that as long as it accomplishes the same goal at the end of the day. I also don't have an issue of the requirement of the initial taking of that certification process, because I completely believe that the example you guys provided from the other jurisdiction, where it became an ongoing educational seminar type component, would be the way that it would go, and it would incorporate things like Mr. Fairborn's background check process and things like those. I completely believe we can reach that collaborative point in the process. So those 2 things I really don't have any significant issue with. I think maybe the area I'm sorry, the last point, the area that I'm concerned about is we have now deliberated on this ordinance for several months, and what I hear a majority saying is you would like to see statistics. What my concern is that we not delay a process that I think there is consensus to move forward with for the duration of however long. In other words, if it takes us 6 months to get these statistics that you're looking for, and we want to dive into those statistics, then I think we're pushing it well beyond.
Christian, I would hope we would have this up for vote if staff could have things together at the next voting session. I don't need a huge analysis of statistics. They're either available or they're not. And if they're not, they're not. I'm not asking the last thing I want is our police department that's understaffed to be spending hours and hours and days of trying to get statistics together if they're not readily available. If they're readily available, I'd love to get them. If they're not, then we don't want to mess with it. It's that simple. I don't want it to hold things up at all.
Any other feedback on the suggestions you made? I know staff probably won't have any other reactions.
I just, I'll wait for you guys. I have just a technical question. Again, at what point, I may have asked this before and I'm still unclear. Is it a conviction or an arrest, or what triggers this?
The preponderance of evidence, I believe.
Well, no, to me there's a huge difference between an arrest and a conviction. And I think in our society we stress arrest a little bit too much. What triggers the statistic? Is it a conviction?
Well, no. The statistic itself is the nuisance
I mean,
call.
what triggers the ordinance?
Well, what triggers the ordinance is criminal activity. But again,
how's that?
Well, it's defined as I would assume. You know, council's put in here preponderance of the evidence, and I'm assuming preponderance of the evidence is in fact the standard that you would have to have in proving that a lease had been breached. Okay, so I think it's the same standard of evidence in any rent case. Okay, so you have a rent case where it says that you have to pay your rent, or you can't have animals. Okay, so you go to court, the landlord says, I'm evicting you because you had animals and I said you couldn't. The standard of proof there is a preponderance of the evidence. Under this statute, if the landlord wants to evict, and this is what I think has really been blown out of proportion. Nowhere does this ordinance require a landlord to evict a tenant who has engaged in criminal activity on the premises. It makes them be reactive to the problem. And I will give an example. Let me give this example and tell me if you disagree with me, Chief. That there is, I'll go to a CDS example, that in the house somebody is charged with possession of CDS. And they go and controlled dangerous substance, whether it's pills, cocaine, marijuana, and they're a first offender, and it's a minor amount, and they go to court and they get convicted. And they get put on probation, and they go through a supervised probation and a drug treatment program, and are getting tested. And the landlord comes to them and says, I've been notified that you had drugs in this house and that you were convicted. I need to be able to make sure that this will never happen again. What is going on to assure me of that? And the landlord is told, this is what's happening. The landlord says to the police, I've verified that this client is under supervised probation. They had a drug problem. They're getting treatment. And I'm convinced that this isn't going to occur again. As I understand it, that would suffice under this statute, and there is no additional penalty to the landlord.
Unless they get called out 3 more times in a year.
Yeah, if you get called out.
And you hit the nail on the head, absolutely. If we start coming back
for
a single occurrence, you're absolutely right.
And I absolutely agree. You start coming back, then you have the nuisance calls.
And you know what? And it could even be that maybe that person moves out, but some other criminal element moves in the same apartment building. But you're looking at just the calls or service of the address. Correct. It doesn't have to be the
That's
same tenant.
Correct.
It doesn't have to be
within a specific time period.
Right.
Yeah. But I feel like I'm being picky tonight, but how about 3 arrests, but no convictions?
Yeah, it does. Mr. Boyer brought that up before. We had talked about that. It does go on the charge, not on the conviction, because the conviction can take months and months and months to go all the way through the court process. Each one of these cases gets reviewed by in this case would be a crime prevention officer before we would cite the landlord. So we would make sure that there was something there to this case. But it goes off of the charge. It goes off of the citation for the loud party. It goes off the citation for the possession of the drugs. It goes off the charge.
And there's good reason for that, because many individuals who are first offenders that are charged with simple possession or relatively minor charges may never get convicted.
Yes.
Not because they're acquitted, but because case is placed on inactive status, or because it's null prost, or because of probation before judgment.
Greater treatment program.
And an example actually is probation before judgment is not a conviction, but you can't get it without a finding of guilt. So that's splitting the hairs, but that's an example. But it would be the same burden that the landlord would have in rent.
But let's get away from drugs. Somebody's arrested for simple burglary 3 times, but it never sticks in court.
But
What happens?
But it doesn't make any difference. If they burglarized somebody 3 miles down the road, they wouldn't even be subject to this ordinance, would
The
they?
impact on the neighborhood, though, is
No,
whenever
it's
the
an
cops
arrest.
have to
It's a
show
criminal,
up for whatever the
potential
call
criminal,
for service is.
but you know, it never goes through.
Yeah, let's say we go there for fights, and there are fights, and there's an assault that took place, and a disturbance to the neighborhood, and an arrest is made. That would count as an occurrence against the property. We would mail a letter out, notify the landlord what took place there, and then that case would work its way through the court system. You know, not every person that gets arrested gets convicted in court. A witness doesn't show up. You know, something gets postponed. They get placed on probation,
or they're not guilty,
or they're
not guilty.
So I hear consensus that that's a fine. That's a standard that's okay with everybody.
Well,
that's what I'm hearing.
The reason we see that as counting is because of just what the mayor said. There's an impact on the neighborhood there.
That's exactly right.
Well, and
if you live in the neighborhoods that are really hit hard with a lot of this, you'd set up and take notice.
And let's get clear, though, when you gave the example of the burglaries, I mean, if somebody goes out and gets in a fight 10 miles from their house, has nothing to do with this statute, right? This statute says shall not engage in criminal activity at, on, or near the said premises. We're talking about the premises. We're not talking about the individual.
Once they reach back to the premises and they start again,
it's the premises that we're talking about. It's not the individual.
And I thought, too, to begin with, that this was supposed to be a tool to help the landlords.
Yes.
Where it has done a reversal, and we are the ones who are guilty of whatever we're doing. Well, again, give me the percentage of the landlords who live in the city of Hagerstown. You want percentages? Give me those percentages. Because that's the real kicker, the big kicker. Everybody's out there screaming, but yet do they live beside of what is going on? And the people who call me know exactly what's going on. And I get tired of it being beaten and beaten and beaten, just like with rental licensing. Oh, God, if we do it, we're going to be sued. We're going to be sued here. We're going to be sued there. Well, what has it proven? It was going well, and then, and not to make it look bad on two that are sitting here, when rental licensing then was laxed, we are now looking at what we have in the city again, and it basically is more code than what it is anything, all right? Now, again, if we combine the ordinance that is in place with rental licensing, if something would happen, and Mark, you'll have to help me with this, okay, because I explained it to you. If something happens with crime-free housing, will it then interrupt what we already have in place?
No, ma'am.
As rental licensing, as combining it?
If a portion of an ordinance, for whatever reason, is found to be non-enforceable or there's some sort of a court ruling on it, that doesn't affect the other portions of the ordinance. So if we amend rental licensing and run into that type of a problem, it would be specific to that amendment.
Your concerns were losing the ground that we're already gaining.
Correct.
And that was the that's what you wanted to talk about.
Yes. And not that it can't go bye-bye. I know anything can, but at least while we're sitting here, hopefully it won't. Because you talk about improving Hagerstown. Well, believe me, without it, we are not going to improve anything. Because the element is here. I don't care what it is. We have to deal with it, but at least be smart in dealing with it.
I want to know if staff have any clarifying questions for us
in terms of direction. If I could add a few thoughts. One, having been involved in the creation of rental licensing and working with the landlords over the last nearly 13 years,
I think there are some folks that obviously are more concerned about their business than they are about our community. And that's just reality. And what we're talking about is getting involved in someone's business. And staff don't present these concepts lightly. But we present these concepts when we look at trying to protect our neighborhoods. And you all live in these neighborhoods. I live in these neighborhoods. Bruce does, and many city staff do. These are our neighbors. And protecting the neighborhoods has to be our focus, and we appreciate the mayor and council passing that vision and commitment to housing in the neighborhoods. Councilmember Metzner, in terms of partnering with the Landlord Association, Chief Holtzman and I met with the executive board of the Landlord Association about a month ago, a little over a month ago, and we offered that. And quite frankly, they said they're reluctant to work with us. And so that was offered. And we met with their president, their vice president, and two of their other board members.
I appreciate
and
that gives me
so,
my answer.
Well, unfortunately for you, Lou, they know what direction to go to, and usually it's your ear, okay?
No, that's fine. You've answered that first question.
And we will continue to reach out to them because, quite frankly, from a staff perspective, we see value in partnering with many agencies in the community, and the direction we've received from this body is to increase our community engagement, and we will continue to reach out to them. In terms of combining the ordinances and that, I believe in conversations with the Chief Holtzman and Mark Boyer, I believe there's a way we can structure the ordinances to achieve what you are suggesting, sir, and what seems to be the majority support. So I think we can get there. The one concept that I wanted to mention tonight, it was something that we had seen that Salisbury, Maryland is currently considering, and that is whether we develop a second track for becoming a chronic nuisance property. Not to diminish and not to be confused with the track of crimes that occur and police response, but to have an excessive use of city services to include code-related items. And just some simple statistics for nuisance-type violations, because while having the police show up at a particular property 3 times in a year, that has a negative impact on the community, and that's what we hear this body saying. But, for example, weeds, trash, debris, simple things that we should, from a staff perspective, we shouldn't have to tell people repeatedly to take care of those issues. In calendar year 13, over 1,800 notices went out one time to properties. There are approximately 640 properties that received at least 2 notices for those types of things. There's over 240 properties that had to be told 3 times. And those types of nuisances also have a negative effect and cause diminution to our property values.
I totally agree.
And so what we would like to do is, when we come back next week, is to put something together and see if we can have a second track to also achieve the chronic nuisance status. And
may I only ask one thing, because I support what you're saying also. I guess under that theory, though, if there's ever been one difficult thing to talk to our constituents about, the best example I can give, and maybe it's not as bad now, but the best example I can give in the world is Barnwood Book Building. We sat for a decade and just saw as a total eyesore. We have the lady who comes in front of us, who every time she comes, she mentions the building on Jonathan Street, which are large structures. And I think we also have to look at how we deal with the landlords of these large buildings in town that are not occupied, not maintained. And I only say that because they're huge eyesores, and I can still remember I think it was actually our former city attorney, got a notice years ago about weeds growing up on the sidewalk, and he had a comment about a place like Barnwood Books, and look at what I'm getting. And so I would like to see that addressed too.
And staff have some thoughts on that, to be able to bifurcate and deal with the simple nuisance type things, and then to deal with the larger problems. And we'd like to schedule that for a future work session for sure, sir.
And I come back next week with some revised language on this. We'd like to keep it moving.
I think you have 5 council members who would like to get this passed at the next regular meeting if we could do it.
Yeah, I think it's an opportunity for a nice, clear, strong message to our neighborhoods that we don't want to miss.
Let me ask John. So John, what you're saying is that you think that we can reduce the bureaucratization of this thing, that is, combine the 2 licenses.
Well,
without damaging.
I think we can combine the ordinance, the segments of the ordinance, so any licensing provision is in one. I think we would be looking at defining an eligible applicant and required training for an eligible applicant. Is likely the type of thing we would do.
The 2-year thing. How do you feel about that?
Well, I'll let the chief comment on that. That's a crime-free aspect.
Sure. Yeah, we talked about the after the initial training. I think it makes sense to if they're in compliance, then we just continue to update them with the information.
So that gets rid of a lot of bureaucracy.
Sure.
Okay.
And can I just suggest one thing when you're coming back with code, and that's down the line. That's nothing. Okay, we've already decided the other 2. All right. Please, can you show that even with Barnyard Books and these other places, because I know that the first cry is going to be with code, is that you've not made this one do this one do. Can you please let us know how many of these people have gone to court? I know for a fact that there has been one in our area that has had over $10,000 in citations, court, the whole bit. But I'd like to know exactly how many have gone to court.
We can provide a report of all the citations that we issue on an annual basis.
Yeah, because that's what the people are going to say, John. I get phone calls, hey, you're dinging me about a little piece here, but what about this piece down here? And so they have to know, there are repercussions. You know what? Yeah, these people are, but they continue to pay fines.
Well, and the other point I would like to make on that, if I could have just a moment, we have 3 full-time inspectors dedicated to 14,000 structures. So we aren't going to get to every violation. So when I hear that response, well, hey, I got a notice for this, but I drove by this other property, we ask for that other property address. And we put it on the list.
Yeah, you don't know what you don't know unless someone tells you something.
Correct.
And so if people have concerns, please report them to us, and we'll get to them in turn.
Right.
Thank you all very much. And again, I think you have support for everybody for this. We appreciate it.
Sounds good. Thank you all very much.
Thank you. All right. That just about does it. We'll move into the city administrator's comments.
Just one quick one. You had a couple budget issues on your agenda tonight. The rate increases for water and wastewater, the bond issue. Next week we'll have a presentation by the actuary on our pension funds. Annual presentation. It came up a little bit earlier this afternoon. 2 weeks from now you'll have a presentation from staff and CBIZ on our health insurance program. So we're trying to keep feeding you information in advance on significant components of the budget. A lot of it's informational, not looking for immediate decisions, but I think it'll help you as you think through our budget and our finances. That's it for me.
I'll give it over to the council. Mr. Metzner.
I would like to say Happy New Year to everyone and express the deepest appreciation for everybody, but most importantly our city employees who were out all day today with water main breaks, working in this weather, and This is the time of the year when our fire department and our rescue people are out more than at any other time, when the weather gets absolutely horrendous, whether it's 5 below zero or 105 degrees. That's when these folks have to go out and go to work, and that's when these folks have to go out and go to work at 3 in the morning and at 10 in the evening. And we should absolutely include linemen in this who have been out taking care of other things. And it's times like this when our citizens need to appreciate what our employees do, and they do one heck of a job, and they don't complain. And I just want to thank them for it and acknowledge it.
Indeed. Ms. Nye.
Well, again, I go along with Lou in thanking the employees, and transformer went in our area, and that was Friday, 4 o'clock. So they were there, Johnny on the spot. We were a half an hour without, and then they knew that it had to be repaired because of the impending weather that was coming Monday, and they had it done, another half an hour. And then today I learned that Fry also got hit with transformer problems. But I'll tell you, the alley, the dangers that all of, honestly, the employees do face, but an alley that is about an inch thick with ice and trying to maneuver on this, whether you have a lift or whatever, it is still very treacherous. And also kudos to the task force for what they had done on Hamilton Boulevard. Hopefully we will be able to get the last person that was involved, and hopefully we'll be able to get a lot more of these types of things taken care of. It's just unfortunate that I've not yet connected all of the dots as to pre-existing, what do I want to say, records on some of these people that could lead into crime-free housing, that it would have been a great tool.
Can I just add one other
thing? Please.
Penny mentioned the word alley. Bruce, I know this has been brought up a million times in the past, but can I bring it up in a different manner? Especially I've been requested repeatedly by the deputies at the courthouse. We have a number of alleys in our downtown that are heavily used by pedestrians. And I know the difficulty, if not the impossibility, of plowing. That's not the issue. The issue is ice. And I'm wondering whether we cannot, well, I'm sorry. And I'm wondering on the alleys in our downtown that are heavily pedestrian used, if we can come up with a method for chemical treatment on them to try to help out. Not only are they fully iced all the time, but 99% of them, because of the buildings, are constantly in shade, so they don't melt.
Yeah.
And my building is an example, the Bryan Center. I've spoken to Mr. Myers and Mr. Young. They have parking in the back there for their clients, and most of their clients are elderly, and they have to walk from that parking through that alley, and it would be very preferable. But like I say, the deputies at the courthouse have made repeated requests for me that they see people slipping and falling in the alleys all the time there, and that involves jurors and things like that. And I'm sorry, thank you.
Good point. Was that it, Penny?
Yeah, I'm finished.
Don?
I'd like to follow up and thank our city employees as well. They kept our lights and our heat on in the worst of times. They were out there in the cold, as Penny said. I'm talking about the police, the fire, talking about public works people, the electric people. They are dedicated, and they work very hard under the worst conditions, and they've proved it over the last 3 weeks, time and again. I'd like to congratulate those who made the donut drop happen. I was talking to an officer downtown, and I said, how many people did you anticipate would show up tonight? And he said, well, about 400. There were 2,500 people down there. And next year, Mayor, if we get involved and make some good decisions, we can have 5,000 people down there. And So I'm going to just pass after that.
Great. Mr. Alshire.
A couple of things. See, the year is starting off right with the editorial section of the paper, which
you still read that?
Resolution not to read, but like this. And the first one, and it doesn't help that Danny sends it to us, but the first one, it is a cross between, one letter of just pure disingenuous rhetoric to just outright lies, and it's hard to sit there and absorb that without responding. But the first one from three authors in regard to an item we discussed tonight, which is the crime-free housing, talks about this volunteer effort because 4 apartment complexes have voluntarily signed on. For the citizens, to put that in perspective, you may read a number of 500 units, but 4, that's 4 out of 9,000 plus. That's less than a fraction of 1%. So when you read those numbers, it's a bit disingenuous to throw the volume of units out there as opposed to the volume of owners. It also makes this assertion that we're placing this burden solely upon, this police burden solely upon the property owners through this ordinance, and that clearly is not the case. It goes so far as to ask, wouldn't it be better to call the police? Well, of course, that is part and parcel to the whole process of establishing that line of communication. I just, and then the closing assertion, we live here. I think that speaks a bit to Penny's point. To my recollection, none of the authors that have signed on live within the corporate limits of the city, and don't share that responsibility to make those decisions, to improve the conditions as we're charged to do. So I would hope that our citizens would read that with a grain of salt. And then the second one, the editorial by Mr. Callahan, with the assertions of that there were $3 to $5 million in private investment on the table for the stadium project. Maybe I missed it in the hundreds of pages of documents I read, or maybe he's counting the owner's contribution as a donation, but typically a donation isn't defined by you donate money and then you make money on the donation you make. So maybe our definition of donation is a bit different, and this the assertion that timing and miscommunication, what was the result of the Board of Ed making its decision to locate. I sat through the presentation by Dr. Wilcox, and clearly, if there was a timing and miscommunication issue, they had made that decision months before we ever sat down and had our initial conversations as this body with them. So I just, the record just speaks completely opposite of the venting of assertions made here. Maybe
it's that old saying, don't let the facts get in the way of a good story.
And I think the only thing we agree on is he's right. It is backbiting and misinformation promulgated by the ill-prepared and misinformed that cause concern. And this letter is no better a representation of that statement than any other. And the notion that 8 loud people in a room speak loudly enough, is what kills the ideas, against the silent majority. I would only have him look back at the most recent election to know that just simply isn't the case on this and a number of the other issues.
Mr. Brubaker.
Well, I'll just reinforce what the other council members said so well about the employees' performance during the recent weather events. And the first part of this meeting, we were talking about financial situation. I think, although we face a lot of tough budget decisions, I think we're a relatively strong platform management over the past year. We have a good platform to work from. Decisions about that we have a good platform. And I want to emphasize that because
a lot of municipalities don't, especially a lot of municipalities that have
the proportion of low-income households and commercial issues that we do.
And I would share in the Thanksgiving for the staff, and one of the donut drop was a great example of city staff collaborating with local businesses and making that event happen. Obviously in times of need when we have electric outages or water main breaks and emergency services, those things, but even when it comes to engineering and Parks and Rec, yesterday was a great example of the teamwork and dedication of our employees in braving the elements for the kickoff for the Hub City 100-miler. I was there and walked the first mile. Bruce was there. We had folks from HR and everyone in Parks and Rec and the engineering department were out in force, and
could have had it inside.
along with dozens of others of folks who came out.
They would have been, I think, a little bit more attentive.
Yeah, but you know, it's wintertime. You got to get out there and do something. So I encourage everyone, even if you haven't signed up and can't pay the fee, just get active and get involved. I do want to note that we received notice earlier that some of the trash and recycling pickup has been delayed because of the cold weather, but we still want people to put their stuff out on the right night. It just might be delayed and being picked up because the guys picking up trash need to get some warmth every once in a while, so that process has been delayed. So I just wanted to let folks know about that. And if there's nothing else, then we will be adjourned.